Hello, and thank you for listening to Mapping the Zone, a podcast that is ordinarily dedicated to discussion of the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. But as has been the tradition now for almost half a year, which is pretty crazy in and of itself, we are discussing Infinite Jest on the occasion of its 30th anniversary. This week we are covering pages 410 through 503, which comprises kind of mostly a set of bridge chapters. There is some important detail in here, but especially after the last two chunks of the book in particular, it is significantly less heavy in the kind of narrative and thematic lifting that it's doing. I normally don't say this before I introduce myself. I don't know why I've pushed this in a different order, but I am one of your co-hosts, the feminized American.
And I'm just some dude.
And what did you think of these pages, some dude?
They were good. I think you're dead on with it being sort of bridge chapters. There's definitely some really, really good scenes in here, some really heavy scenes as far as just the content that's being discussed. But overall it didn't feel like as much of a dense set of chapters. It was a little bit more, I don't want to say breezy, but in comparison to the previous 400 pages, it felt a little bit more of a jaunt than, the slower crawl that I've been having to go through.
Yes. Yeah, very true. This section used to have what my favorite part of the book was in it. As I think I've already mentioned on the show, my favorite part of this book used to be the scene where young JOI moves the mattress with his dad.
Oh yeah.
And his dad dies? Question mark. It's not. It's
kind of ambiguous.
I do also love that not only does he like vomit into the carpet and fall over and break the bed frame, but not only does James leave, but his mom doesn't seem to make any sort of comment about his body. She just starts vacuuming.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the best part. That she just casually gets the vacuum and goes about her business.
Yeah,
and he even says "excuse me" at one point when he has to get around.
Yeah, when he walks past his dad's maybe corpse, it's incredible.
He's at least unconscious.
Yes, yeah. Anyway, we'll get to that at some point, but that used to be my favorite part of the book. I would say that especially with this kind of read through, so far my favorite part has been either the Shacked section or the Boston AA section. I think the video calling will always probably be up there for me, especially because the first time that I read the book when I was pretty young, I that was the moment where I was like, this is I can do this. Like I this is the first section of the book that I fully like can comprehend and sit with for a while, and kind of like gave me a lot of appreciation for what Wallce was capable of. So I think that'll always be up there, but certainly this time through I was like not less impressed. Like all the stuff that works about that scene still works, but it wasn't as impactful to me as those two other sections in particular were. Was there any sort of changes in your appraisal coming through this portion on a second read?
I think really, if anything, this isn't to dismiss this section at all, but like I didn't really remember a lot from this section. And I think that's partly just because of the fact that it is for lack of a better term, I guess, like a lower stakes set of chapters. There's definitely, like I said, there's memorable stuff now that I've just reread it, but it's not something that really truly stuck with me on the first go around. There were some parts that I remembered, like Gately driving around Boston. That one I remembered very well, and that's still some of my favorite writing in this section. I somehow had totally forgotten about the whole mattress scene, so that was a real treat to stumble into again at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say that like my favorite stuff in here is the whole scene in the Antitoire's entertainment shop is just pretty incredible writing.
That is very good.
Yeah, and then the flashback to himself's childhood is also great. And then I would say especially with our conversation on Eschaton in last episode, the stuff with Clipperton I think made a lot more sense to me as far as why it kind of comes up here in the book and also why it's next to some of that, which we'll get into. It's pretty much the first thing we'll get into, really. Um, and yeah, so sort of to kind of do my recap that I do with all of these is we start off with a continuation of Mario's puppet show video, in which we are sort of treated to the history of how subsidized time came about specifically. And then from there, we check back in with Marathe and Steeply. Those conversations remain really fascinating and essentially as a commentary on the broader book as a whole, more or less, and sort of what is happening. And then eventually we get into Eric Clipperton from there and kind of the conclusion of his story, which starts in the previous episode, but we didn't talk about it, partially due to time constraints, but also partially it's less relevant there, I would say, than it is here, given that you're just introduced to the character in the prior section. And then after the Clipperton saga, we finish up with the puppet show. We check back in with the White Flag group for a little bit, and then we learn about what the actual dawn drills are like at ETA if you're one of the top performing junior players. And then from there, we go back to Don Gately, where we learn about his sort of daily routine, which completely changes focus midway through the chapter from Don Gately to a couple of characters known as the Antitois. And after that, we are treated to a story about a simple domestic situation involving moving a mattress. And then this chunk of the book ends. So to kind of dig into it, kind of similar to what we did last episode, there's not a ton in my mind, unless you disagree, to discuss in terms of the political stuff. That if you are reading this book along with us, like, it's right there on the page. But what Wallace is trying to convey is again part of the history of this universe. Because like we had talked about this a little bit last episode, this book is really, I think what makes it so daunting for some people is it is really like entering into a world, like a complete world. World building is something that is more commonly used for something like science fiction than literary fiction. But I would say that of any book that I have read, and I've read a lot of science fiction, this book, more than anything else, really sells the idea of a created world, especially in one volume of work.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think that's something that really made it, I think, easier for me to get into when I first read it. Just from being a longtime fan of science fiction and fantasy, the amount of world building, like you said, is something that you don't commonly see in this kind of book. I guess there's an argument to be made in a way that there is a lot of science fiction elements in the book, but it's not, I don't think it's enough to straight up call it a science fiction novel. But I think he is clearly influenced by a lot of that, and he took a lot from how those kind of books do their world building, and the way in which he introduces these ideas never feels heavy-handed. It never feels forced in. It always just feels like a natural part of the story, and that is part of the genius of how he was able to pull this off. And I think that if he hadn't included that world building, or if he had done it in a more sort of shoehorned way, it would have made a lot more of the book fall flat. So I think his ability to do that is a huge part of what makes this book work.
Agreed. And especially for me, like when I was sort of moving from a lot of genre fiction, like infinite, or not like infinite, just like science fiction, or like some fantasy. But I was, for a really, really long time, like science fiction was principally what it is that I read. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that my writing mentor was a science fiction guy. But I would say that like just kind of starting to cross that divide after Paul Thomas Anderson introduced me to Thomas Pynchon, Infinite Jest was pretty pivotal because there was a part of me that while I was reading was like, oh, this is basically a science fiction book. There's
it is.
there's flying cars. There's
Video
like
telegraphy.
there's video telegraphy. There's weird irradiated animals that live on the border between two nations. And that I think really kind of helped deal with, I don't want to use the word pretentiousness because it is not a pretentious book, but like that kind of perceived difficulty, or for some people that might be perceived, pretentiousness, um, of like a heavy duty sort of literary fiction text.
Yeah. And that's part of what I think keeps people away from it, is that perceived sort of snobbishness of it. And a lot of that's due to the way that people who have read the book or who claim to have read the book go about talking about it. And it's not necessarily that they're wrong in approaching it the way they're approaching it. It's just a lot of the discussion that you hear about this book tends to exist on a pedestal in a way. You don't really hear a lot of just kind of casual conversation about a book like this or about Pynchon. And I think that's part of our goal in doing this podcast in general, was setting that up to just be a much more, it's right in the title part of our show, and it's an informal discussion. And I think that having that ability to talk about the book that way and open it up to people who would be intimidated by it just because of its size or its perceived difficulty or whatever the case may be, I think approaching it that way and explaining to them, like, it's not that it's a difficult book. It's not an easy book to read. Obviously, it's over 1,000 pages. It's got 100 pages worth of footnotes and a lot of dense prose. But at the end of the day, it's a very readable novel, and it's a very enjoyable novel too. So I think that having that, and it's the same with Pynchon. Like his appreciation for genre fiction, which is clearly evident in Against the Day, is really part of what makes it so readable. And I think people tend to miss that part of authors like this and just assume that it's a lot of overly complex language, no plot, no character, no anything other than just technical writing for the sake of, using big words.
Right. And the interesting thing, especially too with him, is he does kind of play into a similar thing with Pynchon, if I may connect this to the main author we discuss on our program, in that sort of high magic of low puns kind of thing, that like high culture, sort of maybe low referential culture, in that if you especially go and dig through his class curriculum and his class syllabi, which a lot of them are available online, he was not asking his students for creative nonfiction, prose fiction, literary interpretation, for any of those, to read really difficult, like complicated stuff. I have a couple of them pulled up here. For his fall of 1994, so just a couple years before Infinite Jest would come out, when he was teaching Literary Analysis 1 prose fiction, this would have been when he was teaching in Illinois, I believe. His required reading for his class, the books that he required his students to buy, were Where Are the Children by Mary Higgins Clark, Rockstar by Jackie Collins, The Big Nowhere by James Elroy.
Currently reading that one. That's awesome.
Black Sunday by Thomas Harris, and The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris. Carrie by Stephen King, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. A little bit later in history, in 2003, when he was doing a class on selected obscure and eclectic fictions, his choices were Renata Adler's book Speedboat, Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, Nightwood by Dunya Barnes, Trout Fishing in America and In Watermelon Sugar by Richard Brautigan, Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion, Desperate Characters by Paula Fox, The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing, The Moviegoer by Walker Percy, and The Man Who Loved Children by Christina Stead. So, especially for a class called Selected Obscure and Eclectic Fictions, which underneath the course description is listed as a 170 grade advanced seminar, meaning it's speaking intensive and presupposes the basic set of lit crit tools taught in English 67. Structurally, the course is meant to be more of a colloquium than a professor-led seminar. We are going to read and converse about 9 novels, some of which are kind of long, that date from the 1930s to 1970s. They're books that are arguably good and or important, but are not, in the main, read or talked about that much as of 2003. At the least, then, English 170R affords a chance to read some stuff you're not apt to get in other lit classes. So, like, even within that, he could have picked a lot stranger stuff between 1930 and 1970 if that was the time frame he was looking to do. And then the last one I pulled was a literary interpretation class from 2005. This would have been when he was at Pomona College in California. And his required texts are Waiting for the Barbarians by J.M. Coetzee, The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris again, Pity the Bathtub, Its Forced Embrace of Human Form by Mathia Harvey. That one I don't know what that is. And then What Narcissism Means to Me by Tony Hoagland. So he really did not go deep into a bunch of different, categories. He really seemed to have a great deal of affection and places a lot of importance on genre fiction or stuff that wasn't necessarily difficult or complex in the way that we might define some of his peers or contemporaries in any way. And I think that this portion of the book is where a lot of that comes through, because he's just having fun. Like, a lot of this stuff, yes, does have like a greater comment on consumeristic habits. You can easily look at his history that he outlines here about the creation of Interlace and how that directly tied into like the death of cable news and the rise of sort of ad revenue and sort of siloed self-selection criteria for entertainment as being very relevant to the modern age, especially with things that have happened with Netflix, but you can tell that there is just like a sense of fun and entertainment that he is relishing in when it comes to building out the world of this book. Same with the video calling section. Yeah. I think a lot of that is informed by the significant emphasis that he places on genre fiction in his class syllabus and what he read in his own personal life.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I feel like he has the same. There's a handful of authors that I think do a really, really good job with writing dialogue that make it sound natural and conversational and never sounds stilted or like it's in a book. Stephen King is remarkably good at that. Say what you will about his books and the quality of his books, his ear for dialogue is phenomenal. And I think Wallace, if he wasn't inspired directly by him, I'd be shocked, because I think he takes a lot away from the way King sets up conversations between characters and has them speak to each other. And I think that's really evident, especially in the Orin and Hal conversations.
The phone conversations?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so really what's happening in a lot of this section of the book is teaching you about why it is that years are named after products, right? Like that is ultimately what this is getting at the heart of. And we could probably spend an hour talking about like the implications of those and how they relate to the modern world. But I feel like it's fairly obvious. I don't think that we need to go through all of that with the listeners, especially if they are reading along like this sort of podcast is intended to operate as.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, if somebody has something specific that they want us to talk about in regards to that, send us an email.
Please
we'll
do.
Be happy to. But I think, like you said, it's pretty much all right there on the page.
Yeah, definitely. So then, interspersed within this, we get a couple of sort of check-ins with Marathe and Steeply. The first one happens in the 30th of May, 1st of May, of course. This is on page 418, where Marathe or Steeply rather, is essentially asking Marathe the same question that Orin calls Hal to ask. These two sections are very much parallel with one another, where Steeply is just trying his absolute best to figure out like why this sort of like hatred or mutually assured destruction that you want to engage in. What is the problem here? And that's really what they kind of get down to in this section. What did you think of this, Cody?
I love this. There's a note in my book that just says excellent conversation between Marathe and Steeply. These have always been one of my favorite parts of the book.
Yeah.
And I always look forward to them. I'm glad that this section had so many of them. It and again, I've had to, and this is something that's going to come up again, and when we get to the reader or the listener responses, but my view of Marathe got shifted last episode when you brought up the whole thing with his being a fascist. So I've kind of been reading this in a new light, and it's making a lot more sense in that respect. So, like I have giant chunks of this whole section that are just like block sectioned off, just as really, really amazing parts of this conversation. Like I'm looking at 424 right now, where it says Steeply nodded in a way that indicated willing patience with someone whose wits were not too speedy. But there you go. This question itself shows how our different types of national character part ways from each other, Remy. The American genius, our good fortune, is that someplace along the line back there in American history, them realizing that each American seeking to pursue his maximum good results together and maximizing everyone's good. We learn this as early as grade school, as kids. I am seeing. This is what lets us steer free of oppression and tyranny, even your Greekly democratic howling mob-type tyranny. The United States, a community of sacred individuals which reveres the sacredness of the individual choice. The individual's right to pursue his own vision of the best ratio of pleasure to pain, utterly sacrosanct, defended with teeth and bared claws all through history. That is such an idealized version of what America is, and it's perfect for him to have that viewpoint, and for Marathe to be coming at him from the opposite end of that, because it's interesting too, because I just finished reading a book called Forget the Alamo that is really very much about this idealized version of history, specifically white history, and how it's always viewed through this lens of, we're fighting tyranny, we're fighting for freedom, and we're fighting for this. And really, if you trace back a lot of the major wars that took place in the early part of the forming of this country, every single one of them was over slavery and the right to own people. So if the irony of we're fighting for individualism and for freedom of the individual, but that freedom means that we can own people, is such I can't even wrap my head around that logic. It's so dumb. But it's so perfectly stated here. Like that's exactly what so much of the country really believes, is that there's this invisible tyrannical force that's oppressing us and taking away freedoms, but there's not either of those things happening ever. So that was one of my favorite sections of this section.
I like what you read out there, because in that section of this is what lets us steer from oppression and tyranny, that whole sort of quote. The first thing that I thought about that was the line from Inherent Vice, where Coy Harlingen is talking to Doc and he says, "Suppose your mom was strung out on smack. Wouldn't you try to do something to help her?" And Doc is like, what are you talking about? And she's like, she's addicted to sending soldiers off to die in the jungle, and there's something wrong and suicidal about that she can't stop. Like that is certainly something that I was thinking about through this whole sort of beginning portion of this conversation, before they start talking about delayed gratification, because like Marathe is asking a fair question of like, if someone's pleasure is my pain, how do you solve this like distinctly American question of the pursuit of pleasure in the first place? Like you can't. There's no way to make those work. And if you go back to page 423, there's another thing here from Steeply where he says, For me personally, as an American, Remy, if you're really serious, I think it's probably your standard old basic American dreams and ideals. Freedom from tyranny, from excessive want, fear, censorship of speech, and censorship of speech and thought. He was looking with seriousness, even in this wig. The old ones, tested by time, relative plenty, meaningful work, adequate leisure time, the ones you might call corny. His smiling revealed to Marathe lipstick upon one incisor. We want choice, a sense of efficaciousness and choice. To be loved by someone, to freely love who you happen to love. To be loved irregardless. I love that that's not a word, and Wallace includes it in there. To be loved irregardless of whether you can tell them classified stuff about your job. To have trust you and trust that you know what you're doing. To feel valued, not to be agendalessly despised. to have good neighborly relations, cheap and abundant energy, pride in your work and family and home. The lipstick had been smeared onto the tooth when the finger had removed the grain of tobacco. He was faisant monter la pression. The little things, access to transport, good digestion, work-saving appliances, a wife who doesn't mistake your job's requirements for your own fetishes, reliable waste removal and disposal, sunsets over the Pacific, shoes that don't cut off circulation, frozen yogurt, a tall lemonade on a squeak-free porch swing. Like, all that's great. That's a lot to ask.
Yeah.
Like Steeply doesn't even understand that, like, saying that that is what the average American wants, and that's, like, just sort of normal and okay, like, maybe in an idealized sense, but, like, when you get down to it, what it is that he is actually saying that every single person in America wants, is not representative of the experience of most of the country, and never has been. But is also actually a lot more to ask than he is making it out. A lot more to ask in the sense that, like, there is almost no way to provide that for a massive amount of citizenry without things like imperialism or conquest or like a uniquely different brand of evil from fascism, the side that sort of Marathe is engaging in. And like it has become even more relevant now than I would say in the 90s, because even more so than before, someone's going to read through that and be like, this is absurd. Like, this is not the life almost anyone in America lives anymore.
Right.
You know, maybe the kind of upper 10% of society lives that way.
It's a very Randian way of looking at the world. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and there is no way to achieve what Steeply is talking about on the scale that America is without an inherent evil and an inherent need to whitewash the ways in which those things are obtained, which is of course important for the previous section that this is intercutting into, in talking about the subsidized time and how that is just a way to generate money lost due to irradiating an entire section of the country and then giving it to another country by force.
Yeah, I love that section. That was another one that I had block noted. And I do think there's a little bit of a tell that Steeply lets out about a wife who doesn't mistake your job's requirements for your own fetishes. I underlined that. I was like, that's kind of interesting. Like, that seems really hyper specific. So a little bit of him maybe giving away too much.
Some domestic drama in his own life.
Yeah.
Because again, why are they making him disguise himself as a woman?
It's such like, I love it though.
Like, I could be wrong, but at no point does he actually fuck Orin. So, like, what?
Yeah,
I don't. What he's getting at?
I don't. Yeah,
there's probably a woman who works for the Department of Unspecified
that
Services.
They could have gotten in. Yes. And I can't help but see him, like, every time I read a section that he's in, and his physical appearance is brought up. I cannot help but think of Randy Marsh doing like his Lord cosplayer, just like some bad costume where he's still got his mustache and, like, you know, he hasn't taken any real efforts to make himself look like a woman. He's just kind of thrown on the bare minimum.
And I think that the stuff that we're choosing to spotlight here kind of reveals what these conversations are doing structurally, and that they are providing a direct commentary on the other portions of the text. Like, yes, the whole book is jumbled. You know, it is that sort of, as Michael Peach would put it, thing that was dropped from a great height. But the Marathe and Steeply sections are particularly unique because it's one conversation that they have over the course of the better part of a day, I guess, probably when you really get down to it. And that is split up, but that mostly takes place before anything else in this book does. It's very, very early in terms of the actual sequence of events. It takes place in May of the year of the dependent adult undergarment. Most of this book takes place in October November
September,
of year of the dependent adult undergarment. So why is it broken up into the chunks that it's broken up into, right? Like, that's an easy question that you can ask from a structural perspective. And when you really get down into like the things that they are discussing, they are directly providing a degree of interpolation with the main text, like the stories that are being revealed from later in the year. Especially on a second read, the earliest stuff where they're talking about like the dead Canadian diplomat and, you know, what are you looking for? Do you have a copy of the entertainment, so on and so forth, is very clearly in conversation directly with the things that are happening in the text at that time. And that remains the case throughout. You know, we talk a lot about how, especially in the last episode, about how their discussions affected that. This is no different, right? Like it is, we are given political access through Mario's puppet show to kind of the existence of the philosophical nature of the United States at this point in history in this sort of alternate world. And this is very much a philosophical discussion of what that American mindset is. So the best way that I can think of to kind of pitch these sections to the reader is as a running commentary on the other events that you're reading. And so as you continue to kind of go through it, it's probably very instructive for you to keep in the back of your mind, what does this have to do with what it is that I have just read? Because it's always going to sort of come after something important rather than precede something else that's important.
Yeah, it's kind of, it acts as a sort of like a backfill section. Like it takes the events that have already happened and sort of kind of, for lack of a better term, fills in the gaps. But it doesn't do it always like really, really concretely. There's a lot of kind of subtleties and things you have to pick apart from it. But that's, you know, I really appreciate that about that, because it allows you as the reader to come away. I think I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase this. Like, I think if they were sectioned to be in front of the sections of the book that they were kind of explaining or filling in the gaps for, it would be doing a little bit of a disservice because it would be giving away too much. I think by having them placed after the events, you've already had time to sort of start building this picture in your mind of what's been happening. And this is sort of acting to connect all these loose ends that haven't yet been tied up. And so it's just, and it's not all of them at once, obviously. It's just covering the specific part of the book that we've been reading so far. But it is just slowly making this patchwork kind of come to life and start to really bring the color out, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, agreed. And it's done very cleverly because it is informing the reader of what Wallace is thinking about without making it just the author screaming at you from the page in a way, which is nice. And so the two of them are discussing mostly politics, and then eventually it changes from politics to this sort of discussion of delayed gratification that comes about out of Marathe asking, like, okay, what if we both want a cup of soup and there's only one cup of soup and we can't share it? What do you do then within this like American lens of the pursuit of pleasure at any cost? And this is where I think a lot of like the big moral structure or end goal of the book is articulated, as well as kind of comments on some of the stuff that we've learned about ETA versus AA at this point in the book. This is all stuff from like page 428 to 429, 430. What did you think about this half of their conversation?
This is my favorite part of this conversation.
Yeah, same.
It is a really, really good dissection of that type of argument, and watching Steeply basically jump through hoops trying to explain all of the little holes that Marathe is poking in his ideology of, you know, well, if there's not enough, then we can both share it. Well, I wanted the whole thing, so how is that fair to me now, and how is that fair to you? And he starts dropping in all these little. It's a very good philosophical discussion, and it's written in a very, like I said, going back to that whole thing I said about conversation, like it is written in such a way that it really does feel like these just two people speaking. It doesn't feel like Wallace is trying to punch you in the face with this philosophy. It's letting the characters live in this world and have this conversation so that the reader can kind of come to their own realization of the logical fallacy that exists within this argument. And
Yeah.
like you said earlier, it's one of those things where it can, these kind of things can work on a small scale, but once you blow it up to the size of a country, especially the size of a country like the United States, it falls apart really fast. And the people who think that it can work, like Steeply, are going to do these mental gymnastics to make it work, even though it doesn't. And so they'll throw in these just logical paradoxes that cannot work, but they've convinced themselves that they can, because they live in this sort of world where if it doesn't work, then their whole worldview falls apart and they have to kind of start over. And that's a big part of also why we're where we are now politically.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the interesting thing is especially with what you're talking about is like it works on a small scale, but not on a major scale. That also applies to Marathe. You can kind of have a personal fascism, for lack of a better way of describing it, for your relation to your habits or your substance use or your personal achievement. And that can be effective and efficient for you without harming anybody else. You can absolutely do that. But, and I kind of want to do another one of our sort of stage play readings between these two characters here with a section. But as Steeply will point out, you can't do that on a societal level. You can't have a bunch of people screaming at other people to stop. And once we read this section, I'll kind of elucidate what I think Wallce is doing there. But if you want, I'll read Steeply's description, Steeply's dialogue, and then also the action descriptions.
Okay.
Starting with, in other words, delayed gratification, and then running through to balance his interests. And then if you want to read Marath's lines. In other words, delayed gratification.
Good. This is well. Delayed gratification. How is my USA type able in my mind to calculate my long-term or overall pleasure, that I decide to sacrifice this intense soup craving of this moment to the long-term and overall?
Steeply sent out 2 hard tusks of smoke from the nostrils of his nose. His expression was one of patience together with polite impatience. I think it's called simply being a mature and adult American instead of childish and immature American. A term we might use might be enlightened self-interest.
Déclassant.
Steeply, he did not smile back. Enlightened. For example, your example from before. The little kid who will eat candy all day because it's what tastes best at each individual moment.
Even if he knows inside his mind that it will hurt his stomach and rot his little fangs.
Teeth, Steeply corrected. But see that here it can't be a fascist matter of screaming at the kid or giving him electric shocks each time he overindulges in candy. You can't induce a moral sensibility the same way you'd train a rat. The kid has to learn by his own experience, how to learn to balance the short and long-term pursuit of what he wants.
He must be freely enlightened to self.
This is the crux of the educational system you find so appalling. Not to teach what to desire, to teach how to be free, to teach how to make knowledgeable choices about pleasure and delay and the kid's overall down-the-road maximal interests. Marath farted mildly into his cushion, nodding as if with thought. And I know what you'll say, Steeply said. And no, the system isn't perfect. There's greed, there's crime, there are drugs and cruelty and ruin and infidelity and divorce and suicide, murder.
To bonk the head.
Steeply again dug at his strap. He would snap open the purse and then pause to remove the brazier's tight strap and then dig into the purse, which sounded femininely full and cluttered. He said, but this is just the price. This is the price of free pursuit. Not everyone learns it in childhood, how to balance his interests. So what I think Wallace is doing here is, again, a comment on the eschaton section. That what he's talking about is like, see that it can't be a fascist matter of screaming at the kid or giving him electric shocks each time he overindulges in candy. That's what ETA is trying to do with like these incredibly strict rules, the way Stitt runs AM drills, which we're about to read about, the way in which it tries to create this sort of map and territory situation of just do these things and you'll be successful and everything's gonna be fine. Just fucking listen to what we tell you. And Stitt's like about to engage in that a little bit here. But we see from the eschaton section that this is, I think, in conversation with, that it just doesn't work. That like you can give kids this sense of responsibility all you want, but at the end of the day, they're children, and they're not going to be able to properly understand that. They are going to need to at some point develop some degree of personal ethic or as Wallace might put it, like real machinery in their guts to figure that out on their own. And I think that's where this book is trying to paint that AA can be successful where something like ETA cannot. Where like ETA, for all of its sort of protestations that it builds character and it builds these future tennis professionals and everything that entails, we see that it doesn't work. Look at the state of the upperclassmen. They all do drugs other than shacked. They're all in various states of like crashing out of school or of realizing they're not going to be successful or of being way too in their own head, which this book spotlights at so many different opportunities as being the worst place that you could be constantly. Or, you know, are sort of doomed to be middling professionals who never figure it out. The upperclassmen don't possibly help the underclassmen when they need help. All of the eschaton sequence, it doesn't work. You can create these fascist systems, but the only thing that will work is, as I've kind of put, a sense of personal fascism. And that is essentially, I think, what AA is within this book. This idea that, like, if you're within this, like, system that tries to control everything that you possibly do, that does not work. What does work is something where you just have to hold yourself accountable to a really high degree alongside with a bunch of other people doing the exact same fucking thing. And then you have a significantly better chance to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is what this portion of the book is trying to articulate, trying to showcase that these systems of, you know, I guess I'll say institutional fascism don't work to fix anything. There has to be a personal angle of that, and that's what AA can give you. And I think what's really interesting is if you go and you read interviews from this time frame or you listen to interviews from this time frame, if you've seen the end of the tour, a portion of what he would say is in there where he says, like, as entertainment gets better and images get more seductive, we are going to have to develop some real machinery within our gut in order to turn off unalloyed pleasure. Otherwise, in a very meaningful sense, we're going to die. And that's immediately what I thought of with this candy analogy this time through.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about, like, okay, what does that actually mean to develop that machinery, right? And Steeply can talk about the fact that, like, America tries to do that through its educational system, and maybe it does, but it's also clear from the book and from just the lived experience of myself being an American and you being an American, it doesn't actually do that.
Yeah.
That it's at some point, like, spiritual desire or not, through that educational system, through that institution, through that freedom, that you are going to have to make a choice for yourself at some point. And that is, I think, what this book is really trying to point the reader towards.
Yeah.
That putting your faith in these, like, lofty ideals from institutions or putting your faith in something like a fascism, neither of those work. That it comes down to what it is that you need to discover is sort of the exact right amount for yourself, what that looks like, and then you have to hold yourself accountable for that.
Yeah. And I think that's really evident in, I think you can look at Gately and Hal as sort of opposite sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
Hal is what Gately was as a youth, right? He is kind of reckless. He's very smart. He's very capable, but he's reckless and impulsive and lets this sense of self-want and sort of selfishness kind of control him. Gately as an adult is arguably maybe the only really successful person in the story, in that he is the only one who has that personal drive to better himself.
Mm-hmm.
He really truly wants to get a hold of himself and make this change to become sober, to become a better person, and to really turn his life around. And that's why he's able to move forward. He doesn't get stuck in that recursive loop because he wants that change. He is actively going for it and not just relying on AA to kind of get him through.
Yeah. And of course, you know, as this conversation continues, we again see the failure of the American side of things when Marathe asks, like, how could you be afraid of something when we're just making it available? Like, we're not going to force people to watch the entertainment. We're just going to make it available for people to watch. Like, what why would you be afraid of that if you have this enlightened choice system? And it's because there's no internal morality there. There's no internal what is right and what is wrong. It's just follow your pursuit, follow your path. And that's, you know, that is what Don is doing as well, he is following his path, but it comes about as a result of like a real radical choice that he makes. Well, that brings us to Eric Clipperton. What, before I talk for probably a really long time, I would guess, what is your conception? I guess maybe I should start by Eric Clipperton's a character who plays tennis with a gun to his head.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah,
and he does it in order to keep himself from losing.
Yep.
What, I guess, is your conception of Eric Clipperton as a character? What do you think it's doing in the book? I'm just sort of curious for your take on it.
I don't know that I've really formulated a solid sort of analysis of him as a character. I think the best I can come away with right now is that he reads very much to me like the sort of personification of, in a weird way, the American experience of turning history around to where no matter what, it's always we won. And I think that, weirdly, I think reading that book I've been reading about the Alamo, it's kind of helped form that. In that I think that that's a prime example of kind of what Clipperton is. This person who's so afraid of losing, of being perceived as someone who didn't win, even if it's just once, that he'd rather end his own life than to have to live like that. And if you look back at, especially like something like the Alamo, where that was a decisive loss for the Texian army at the time, but they have spun it in such a way that it reads as a victory, even though they straight up lost. They went on, later on to San Jacinto and Goliad, and that was a different situation. But the Alamo is the part of that that's remembered so much. And they have done so much truth stretching to manipulate how that is portrayed. And people in Texas can't accept the fact that these were like bad people. Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie and William Travis, like these are bad guys. But they have rewritten history so much because they are so afraid of accepting the fact that these were racist, misogynistic, awful people. They can't live with that reality. And I kind of see Clipperton in the same way. Like, he is so preoccupied with the idea of being perceived a specific way, which is as someone who lost, which is a common thing that happens to everyone. But he cannot live in that reality. And so he would rather live in a reality in which he is perceived as a crazy person who plays tennis with a gun to his head.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is in there. I mean, it's especially relevant too, given the whole situation with America and Iran right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Such
Vietnam,
really, yeah, Vietnam, the Iran conflict, this whole thing. So I think you're absolutely spot on with some of that. I think that within the book, I think he is an example of how these kind of, I'm going to just say, fascist institutions like ETA ultimately fail their students, like, as another kind of example of that. Because what happens in these sections is we're told that Clipperton, as a result of subsidized time coming about and the reconfiguration underneath Onan coming about, that the previous officials within the kind of competitive tennis circuit for juniors in America are replaced by these Onan officials who have no fucking clue what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, they rank Eric Clipperton number one because he's never lost, whereas the prior officials actually understood kind of what was happening here and just sort of let Eric Clipperton do it, and they never ranked him as such. And so in like this moment of sort of intense fear, he goes to ETA seeking advice, and instead of getting advice, he finally actually kills himself in himself's office. And to me, it feels very specific that he is going to an institution that is supposed to be this like font of wisdom, this place where like the best players are turned out, they're consistently doing really well, and that they have this sort of rigorous training, both mentally and physically, that is designed to help get kids to this point of success. That he's going there, even though he's from, I think, like Texas or something like that in the book, and is seeking, or maybe it's Florida, somewhere not near Massachusetts, and that he's seeking advice from the guy who started that academy, who, as far as especially Charles Tavis later sort of details in this exact section, was really kind of checked out. But this kid wants to talk to him, and he decides to kill himself in the institution that is supposed to give him the advice on how to handle the fact that he now has this ranking that is completely unearned. That he has been given this mantle of like the best player, but he is not. That to me feels very resonant with the idea that this institution, and I assume the other ones like it within this book's universe, are trying to fill the students going there with this sense that they are great, that they are well developed in their skills, that they are well developed to handle adult life even as a teenager, and yet they're not. And you see that at every single turn. It feels like Clipperton is the sort of almost apotheosis of that, I guess. And the fact that that comes about as a result of a completely misaligned to priority government program feels especially resonant within the sort of overall talk of like United States philosophy for radical change and radical pleasure seeking and so on and so forth, and how, you know, just engaging in the pursuit in and of itself is a good thing, right? You can't say that Eric wasn't engaged in that. He was cheating though, and it led to his own death. So I feel like, again, this is really, to me anyway, I think you're absolutely spot on with maybe the character of America, but I think to me as well, it is this almost, like I mentioned, apotheosis of these different ideas of just these institutions, government, school, all of that. They just fail. They just fail to do what it is that they're supposed to do.
Yeah,
is the way that I really really read this section with Eric Clipperton.
no, I think that's I absolutely see that, and I think if you blow it out from a larger perspective too, it's you could see that, you know, that's the whole United States and how the education system alone. Wallace was teaching at this time, so he would know that, you know, the education system, as well intentioned as it may be, has generally failed, and it's not necessarily the responsibility, or not. I shouldn't say the responsibility. It's not the fault of the teachers or the administration. It's really it's so much higher up. There's so much self interest and general selfishness at the top of the education system. At least there was until they started gutting it. That it was never like the idea of teaching kids and having these kids get a good education for their future. That hasn't been the reality for a long time, and that failure, I think, is really shown in Clipperton, and I think you're spot on with that.
Especially too, like if you read through this section where he goes to ETA, and then go back and read the kind of what the admissions process to AA is like back on page 348, they're very similar. In terms of like, you know, eventually you break down and the substance is broken you down so bad that you call and two people show up at your house at, you know, 2 a.m. who seem to like genuinely want to help you, and you have these conversations and you agree to go to a meeting and all of that. Like there is a similarity in these two scenes. But of course, one leads to a death and the other leads to the rest of that Boston AA chapter, which is about the process of recovery as a whole. And I think it's especially kind of telling that in the Boston AA section, the stories of recovery, of what led you to your lowest point, and so on and so forth, lead to a degree of recovery. We are reading Eric Clipperton's lowest point in this section. And then after he kills himself, it is then utilized by Stitt, the fascist, to intimidate other children into not repeating his mistakes. Like these two things feel like a very intentional inversion to me.
Yeah.
In a way that is really, really smart that I don't think I noticed the last time I read the book.
Yeah, and that was another thing, and I'm glad you bring that up, because I hadn't both in my first read through of it and up until this section, I hadn't really made the connection between how much infield is the tennis academy part of it is basically AA, and how that becomes evident about 20 pages on when they start talking about the training process that takes place, and the rigorous way in which it's set up. It's divided into 8 different courts, which, it's not the 12 steps, but it is 8 very defined different areas where you're working on specifically different things, and there's a hierarchical structure to it, and you have to go through it in this certain order, and so on. It very much is the same kind of process, and that's just something that, again, the joys of rereading. You always find these new things, and I love it.
I mean, if you want to get like really crazy, you can even compare that to Gately's dream in Boston AA, where he dreams about all of them kneeling around on the circle, and there being that guy hovering above them with his cane. Shit hovers above them in a crow's nest, like waving around his pointer stick. There are a lot of repeated motifs across those couple of different environments that I think really tries to tie the two of them together, and that they are both trying to achieve the same thing for different reasons, like radical self-responsibility and transformation, and one works and one doesn't. And I think especially if you look at Wallace's life, it is clear that like AA and the recovery process really helped him in a major way. I mean, this book wouldn't exist in the way that it does if that wasn't the case. But what did fail him was institutions. Like, he had his breakdown and his addiction when he was pursuing going to Harvard for his graduate education, which, if you're going to look at that as a comparison of education to like a high performance in tennis, Harvard is, the ETA of that educational institution that he was operating within. So I think it's very clear why he's drawing these parallels that he is, if you understand kind of the flow of his life.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Do we have any thoughts on Stavros Labuculus? I think is maybe how his last name is pronounced. Gately's other boss.
I don't, but I do real quick before we jump into that section. I did want to mention that one of the funniest scenes for me in the Clipperton section was towards the end, where it says, this is on 433, Clipperton's had no clue about where Eric had even disappeared off to most weekends, and bought his explanation that all the tall trophies came from an after-school job as a freelance tennis trophy designer, the parents apparently not exactly being the 2 brightest bulbs in the great U.S. parental light show. That just, I got a really good laugh out of that one. Just the sort of blind belief that parents will have about their kid. Oh, he's a freelance trophy designer. Yeah,
for tennis specifically.
Makes sense. That checks out.
Yeah.
Now, as far as Gately's Stavros, I don't. I do think
his humility job is, I think, what they called him earlier in the book.
So this is where I started noticing about Gately, like how specifically nuanced he is about his not wanting to relapse. So much so that I think he mentioned specifically later, and I highlighted it, so I'll find it when we get to that point. But he talks about later how AA tells you not to have sex for the first year that you're there. And there's a section here on 435. The barracks' cots reek of urine and have insect activity observable. The state employees who supervise the shelter at night are dead-eyed and watch softcore tapes behind the desk and are all around Gately's size and build. And he's been approached to maybe work there himself, nights, supervising more than once. And he said thanks anyway, and always screws right out of there at 0801 hours and rides the greenie back up the hill with his gratitude battery totally recharged. I think he is so concerned about relapsing that he doesn't even want to put himself in a situation where he could get addicted to even softcore pornography. And I find that really fascinating. It really speaks to his character, and is what makes him such a fascinating character to me, is that he, like I said earlier, like he really truly is committed to this, and he has that personal motivation to get better. So much so that even something as seemingly harmless as just joining these, dudes on the security job who aren't doing anything but watching softcore pornos, he doesn't want to put himself at risk of falling down any kind of hole again. So he is taking the responsibility upon himself to remove himself from that situation and make sure that cannot and does not happen.
Yeah, I think that's really smart, especially because like it is easy to follow the rabbit hole of softcore pornography leading to hardcore pornography, leading to
Mhm.
desiring to actually have sex, to actually having sex, and then all of a sudden
You're a
you put
sex
yourself
addict
at
and yeah.
risk. Yeah, or
Yep.
you put yourself at risk to relapse in other ways.
Yep.
Especially given that the other people in the quote that you read out look like he does. They
Yes,
they are
that's the
all
key, yeah, they're just basically mirrored
yeah.
versions of him.
Yeah, and I think that absolutely this section is meant to be an example of this, like, radical self-honesty and radical self-acceptance of his situation and doing anything to, like, avoid, um, going back to his prior life. Like, this is maybe the worst job you could have.
Oh,
Like,
yeah, cleaning piss and semen off of a wall. It's about as bottom of the barrel as you can get as far as jobs, I think.
really, really bad, especially in a place where I imagine that most of the residents there are in active addiction.
Oh,
So,
for
like,
sure.
so he is literally cleaning a house of addiction, I guess is the way that I'll put it for artistic purposes. Like
Yeah.
that is what he is engaging in there. Um and it really does speak to a lot of his character's responsibility for staying clean and his desires. I think the way that you've put that is very smart. Not that I have much to say much to say about it, but shout out to the kid who killed his whole family because he couldn't handle the stress of being a
Oh,
ranked
Jesus. Yeah.
tennis player. I feel bad every time I read this and I just start laughing, but it's 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 written
Yeah.
really, really funny.
That's kind of the thing about this whole section that we read, I noticed, is that there are scenes that are very, um, like, descriptively heavy, like, they're serious scenes, and they involve a lot of emotional weight, but they're funny at the same time. And we'll
Yeah.
we'll get to a couple of them later on, but yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and as he's building out this case that like ETA is worthless, right? Like he articulates this whole scene, which I guess I'll just read part of it. Came home late that night and drank a big glass of Nestle's Quick laced with the sodium cyanide his dad kept around for ink for drafting. Drinks cyanide Quick in his family's home's redecorated kitchen and keels over dead, blue-faced and still with a ghastly mouthful of lethal Quick. And apparently his dad hears the thump of the kid keeling over and rushes into the kitchen in his bathrobe and leather slippers and tries to give the kid mouth-to-mouth resuscitation but gets the odd bit of NaCN laced Quick in his own mouth from the kid and also keels over and turns bright blue and dies. And then the mom rushes in a mud mask and fluffy slippers and sees them both lying there, bright blue and stiffening. And she tries giving the architect dad mouth to mouth and is, of course, in short order, also lying there, keeled over in blue whenever she's not mud colored from the mask. But anyway, dead as a rivet. And since the family has 6 more various aged kids who, as the night wears on, come in from dates or patter down the stairs in little pajamas with adorable little pajama feet attached to them, drawn by the noise of all the cumulative keeling over. Plus, I should mention the odd agonized gurgle sound. But since all 6 kids had gone through a 4-hour Rotary sponsored CPR course at Fresno's YMCA, by the end of the night, the whole family's lying there blue-hued and stiff as posts with incrementally tinier amounts of lethal Quick smeared around their rictus grimmest mouths. So, like, first of all, it's an example of Wallace's really genius ability to escalate a situation
Yes.
with detail.
Yes.
I think he really reached, like, the height of his powers of this type of writing when he describes the first day at the IRS that his self-named character has in The Pale King.
Yeah.
Where just every single piece of information he adds there just escalates and escalates, and it gets crazier and crazier within the detail. But so it's a good example of that kind of hallmark of his writing. But it's also, they say, in response to that, become mandatory to have a psychologist on staff. And it literally tells you in the book that the one that the ETA hired is useless.
Yeah.
So as another example of just like these institutions have no ability to do what it is that they're claiming they're going to do for their kid.
Mm-hmm. And it's, to go back to your point about escalation, like, what's really brilliant about this is you see this coming. Like, by about the time the mom gets involved, and you start to realize like this is like some Monty Python type of shit where it's just going to be one after another. But he does this really clever thing where, to add a layer of realism to it, the reason the kids got involved is because they learned CPR at the YMCA. When I read that line, I out loud was like, "Oh no!"
Yep.
Because it shifts so quickly from it's getting comedic, it's very funny, to okay, now the kids are like that's a little bit of a stretch. Oh, it's because they learned CPR. Fuck, like it's just so brilliantly written.
Yep, it absolutely is. So that kind of brings us to the end of the really long chapter of Mario's film. Like all of the stuff that we talked about at the end of the last episode, all the way through to this, it's all the same chapter.
Yeah.
Of just weaving back and forth between these different elements of Mario's movie, but other things that are happening on Interdependence Day that people are kind of thinking about. Do you have any other thoughts on that before we return to Gately?
I do just want to point out the amongst the headlines that precede Mario's film, there was one that really made me laugh. Gentle more or less at large watches from oxymoron or oxygenated porta bubble as Clemson downs Boston U in Las Vegas's Forsythia Bowl. Header from that guy who's now reduced to laying out headlines for the Rantoul, Illinois Eagle. I just that credit line is so good. Like he's just that's the point he's at now. He's just delegated or he's just integrated down to being that guy who has to work at the Rantoul Eagle.
Yep. So what did you think about this this portion with Don where he's talking about for me, like some of this is obviously recalling more of like what the recovery process is like, recovering the memories that you lose through substance abuse. I remember when that happened to me, fucking sucked. I hated it. Different things that you hear in AA, the kind of urge to get high disappearing. And then of course there's like the absolutely devastating part towards the end where it's revealed that he just allowed his mother to continue being an active alcoholic, which is just so fucking hard to read.
Yeah.
This section really in some ways kind of feels almost like Don telling a story at a meeting, similar to the two different stories we hear at the end of the Boston AA chapter from those two different women. Sort of him working towards that kind of a thing. Did you have any thoughts on this section that you specifically wanted to talk about?
This might be my favorite section of this section.
Really?
I truly like when I find large chunks of the book that we're reading that I want to focus on or consider talking about, I will usually just like make a long bracket to cover it on the side. Sure. I did a bracket from starting at the beginning of this chapter halfway through page 444. That whole first paragraph is so just, it hits so hard and it's so good. And it sets up this section of the book so well. And I remember reading this part of it and I had to like stop after that first paragraph and just kind of like take a deep breath and like get ready to keep going. Because like you said, this very much does read like Gately's sort of cathartic moment of just kind of getting all of this out and explaining his whole backstory. And it's heartbreaking. And there's some moments in it that are kind of funny. There was a part where he tells the old joke about the blind man going to the fish market. I immediately thought of Afro Man and his crazy rap song because that joke's at the beginning of that song. But then when we get into there, and there's a great line here as I'm flipping through my pages here on 446. It starts to turn out that the vapid or the AA cliche, the sharper the canines of the real truth it covers. Fucking brilliant. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like watching what happened to his mom, like by the end of that section, it's just, you're just so drained emotionally. And it's so hard to get through watching this man recount his childhood and watching his mom die in front of him, like in slow motion, die in front of him. And at the same time, though, it really hammers home what kind of a person Gately is, and really continues to build on this idea of him as really the only winning person in this, because he's gone through so much and he's using all of that as this drive to make himself better. And his recollection of what happened to his mom is just furthering his desire to avoid that happening to himself. And I think what really hurt me, what was really hard to read, and I literally had to put the book down after it. The very end of the section where it says, when his mom was first diagnosed, Gately had gotten the diagnosis mixed up in his head with King Arthur. He'd ride a mop-handle horse and brandish a trash can lid and batteryless plastic lightsaber and tell the neighborhood kids he was Sir Osis of Thulliver, most fearsomely loyal and fierce of Arthur's vessels. That is heartbreaking. And that just fucking wrecked me.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot that this packs into just
a few pages, yeah.
A few pages, yeah. It's not long. I can't really add much to what you've said. There is a portion in here in 446 that I really love of. There's serious pain in being sober, though, you find out after time. Then, now that you're clean and don't even much want substances and feeling like you want to both cry and stomp somebody into goo with pain, these Boston AAs started telling you you're right, where you're supposed to be, and telling you to remember the pointless pain of active addiction, and telling you that at least this sober pain now has a purpose. At least this pain means you're going somewhere, they say, instead of repetitive gerbil wheel of addictive pain. They neglect to tell you that after the urge to get high magically vanishes and you've been substanceless for 6 or 8 months, you'll begin to start to get in touch with why it was that you used substances in the first place. You'll start to feel why it has got you dependent on what was, when you got right down to it, an anesthetic. Getting in touch with your feelings is another quilted sampler rye cliche that ends up masking something ghastly deep and real, it turns out. It starts to turn out the vapider the AA cliche, the sharper the canines of real truth it covers. That is the pain of, in some ways, delayed gratification. Particularly the kind of first half of what he says there. That just like, when you're craving something or when you want something, of course, the kind of highest possible tier of that is drug use, right? You have to sit with that. I was addicted. I was not so addicted to something that I was going to die if I went through withdrawal. I was really sick when I went through withdrawal, but like, I wasn't, using the substance that I used every single day. I wasn't, homeless as a result of it at any point or anything like that. But even with that sort of low grade addiction that I had, I did have to just sit and deal with it. And there is a real lesson in that I have found with dealing with delayed gratification and a lot of other things, of just needing to sit and deal. And it is a truly, truly difficult thing. And I love a page before that, after the fish market joke, the other sort of parable, where it says, Bob Death smiles coolly. South Shore bikers are required to be extremely cool in everything they do, and manipulates a wooden match with his lip and says, no, not that fish one. He has to assume a kind of bar shout to clear the noise of his idling haug. He leans in more towards Gately and shouts that the one he was talking about was, this wise old whiskery fish swims up to 3 young fish and goes, morning, boys, how's the water? And swims away. And the 3 young fish watch him swim away and look at each other and go, what the fuck is water? And swim away. The young biker leans back and smiles at Gately and gives an affable shrug and blats away, a halter top's tit smashed against his back. That parable is obviously sort of famously recounted in his commencement speech, This is Water, much later in his life. Technically the last published thing he ever put out, because it was later bound into a book. But I think that you can interpret it a couple of different ways, but it is true to this idea that, like, as you get older, you have this ability to kind of see things for what they are, or surf through circumstances that other people just cannot see. And it's like, it's of course a cliche that like you're too young to understand this. I hate that I've said that to people at this point in my life because it makes me feel really fucking old.
Yeah,
But,
way to get to age, youngin'.
But there are people that I work with and that I am friends with that I've had to essentially say something like that too. And I remember being so annoyed and frustrated, like whenever my father or other people in sort of the position that I'm in now in life would tell me the same thing. And you just kind of sit there like, what the hell does that mean?
Yep.
But that really is portrayed well through those AA cliches, but then also through that idea of just like what you choose to pay attention to and how you get there will change, and that is part of the process of going through it. No one can force you to get there. It comes with time. And a lot of the commencement speech, I'd highly recommend everyone go and listen to it. It's only 20 minutes. A lot of that commencement speech is about the idea of like, what do you choose to pay attention to? What do you choose to worship? Which is obviously a big part of this chapter in the sense of that sort of a higher deity that Gailey has to choose. And what does that say about you, right? Like it's tied up within all of that. And it's just it's very cool. There's a lot of people, some of which I've argued with on the internet because I'm a child, who claim that David Foster Wallace really abandoned the principles of what this book was about. I think the fact that he uses this parable here in Infinite Jest and again in his commencement speech towards the end of his life is the simplest way that you can possibly refute that argument. Because it is just as viable of a parable then as it was, when he initially wrote the book. So that brings us to the morning drills. Do you have anything else you want to mention that you didn't already about the kind of rigidness of it and how that relates to AA?
No, I think that's as with the other section. I can't remember now what we mentioned that being the case with earlier, but it's very much on the page. I mean, he literally, he goes through each one of these as, this is the first one, and then the second one, and the third one, and so on and so forth. There's some great scenes in here. I love that Otis came back from the emergency room with the monitor still on his head because they couldn't figure out how to get it off without getting like experts from across the globe. And that, and then Nwangi's reedy voice carries. He's telling the bees he wishes to see nothing but assholes and elbows on these sprints. It's unclear to Hal what this might connote.
Yeah,
that one got me too. That was good. But other than that, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's it represents how these kids are being put through these rigorous goals and demands that are wildly out of place for teenagers, and yet we applaud this happening and expect them to do it.
Yeah, and I think that like this Stitz like sermon. I don't know how else to describe what he does towards the end of this section.
That's a good word for it, yeah.
That he gives is such a perfect dichotomy of the stuff we've already talked about that I'm not going to rehash, of personal fascism versus institutional fascism, of like the thing that he is trying to impart to them is true. The idea that like if you are waiting for perfect conditions, it is not going to happen. Like, and you have to figure out how to deal with any conditions that are thrown at you. And obviously, as tennis kind of represents human life and the experience of living as a human being, like there's never going to be these perfect court conditions. You're always going to have something that's in the way or that annoys you, and you have to learn how to fucking deal with that. Like, that is true. But then he goes on later in his sermon, he says, so we're trying to make a new kind of citizen. That's what we're doing here. And it's like, all right, you sound exactly like Marathe. Yep. And if this is the curriculum you're running your school off of, it's not going to work. He goes like, yeah, that you can preach this personal responsibility message all you want, but they have to choose that and buy into that. And I think it's especially telling because the gentle administration is also sort of an idea of like American fascism. And if you go back within the history of kind of subsidized time, there is a link between the guy who helped invent the advertising of subsidized time and Stitt. Like Stitt really believes in that guy. And so like if you had any doubts as far as what Wallace is gesturing at in Stitt's like personal philosophy, he throws it right on the page that Stitt's a big fan of the fascist government. Not just in his home country, but also here in his adopted country.
Oh yeah.
There is also another good detail here in that Hal is comfortable using tobacco at practice now, which like if you're just kind of charting his addiction and how that's devolving, it's a great example of how that is. I think it's also interesting his dream that happens before this segment where he's got a dream where his teeth are falling out. Obviously, he's already articulated like the idiocy of chewing tobacco because it can do that. But then also the fact that Stitt is unwilling, or not Stitt, Schacht is unwilling to help him. That's so, I don't want to like spell it out. That's so clear what sort of parallel between those two characters Wallace is doing there. So then this brings us to Don's kind of, I guess, a daily routine is maybe the right way to put it. It sounded like you had a lot of stuff you wanted to mention within this section of the book.
Yeah, well, so this is another one of those sections that I could just go on and on about, but just the writing in this section, I just found it so beautiful and incredible, and reminds me of Pynchon at his best, like when he is talking about, like the scene in Lot 49 where Oedipa's driving and she sees the city below her as like a circuit board. That kind of, I mean, I do consider it a sort of world building because this is guiding us through this Boston that exists in the story, and the freedom that Gately feels throughout this whole thing, and his just kind of the joy that he is feeling as he drives around, even though he is, as it's described, for Gately, the vehicle's so terrifically tight and sleek, it's like being strapped into a missile and launched at the site of a domestic errand. But this freedom he gets from he's just going to get shit at the store to appease a couple of people who, in his mind, don't really need it, but he's out doing it. And I'm trying to find the part. Oh, here we go. Yeah, the cake mix scene.
Yeah,
where we talk about the cake mix. That's one of my favorite things in here. And I'll just read the little section of it that I blocked off on 467. He told Gately to imagine just for a second that he's holding a box of Betty Crocker cake mix, which represented Boston AA. The box came with directions on the side any 8-year-old could read. Gately said he was waiting for the mention of some kind of damn insect inside the cake mix. G&M said all Gately had to do was, for fuck's sake, give himself a break and relax, and for once shut up and just follow the directions on the side of the fucking box. Didn't matter one fuckola whether Gately believed a cake would result, or whether he understood the fucking baking chemistry of how a cake would result. If he just followed the motherfucking directions and had a sense enough to get help from slightly more experienced bakers to keep from fucking the directions up if he got confused somehow. Basically, the point was if he just followed the childish directions, a cake would result. He'd have his cake. That is such a great way of distilling this whole thing we've been talking about of this sort of self-propelled ability to succeed and that individual fascism. That's what I was looking for that you talked about. Like, you just have to just stop getting in your own goddamn way sometimes and just trust that you can figure it out. And it might not be perfect, but it will be what you're trying to get at. And I think that's such a problem that so many people have of, there's just all these expectations. And a lot of it is just because that's the kind of society we've been fed over the years. But there's always these kind of grand expectations and this anxiety. And I've fallen victim to it countless times of, what if I mess it up? What if I do it wrong? What if I don't do this step or I miss it? Like, just stop, just shut the fuck up and just follow the directions. Like, it took me almost 40 years to figure that shit out. And my life is better for it. And I still have those stumbles, but again, this is part of what I love about Gately's story arc is just this understanding of how he is becoming the person that he is becoming and his drive to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I remember when I first went to NA, I thought to myself, at my first meeting, I basically like crashed out at everybody because no one was talking. And I was so uncomfortable and so like I felt so out of place that at a certain point in like the rant I went on, I was just like, I don't even understand why I'm here. I don't even understand how it's possible that I'm sitting here right now. This is insane. Like, and I know what that's like of just being completely listless and not getting it. And like not understanding how you've ended up in those circumstances and also not understanding how it is that you're going to kind of get out of those circumstances.
Mhm.
And it is true that just like a big portion of it is like you just have to get out of your own way. Like you just cannot question it too much. You just cannot rationalize it too much. You just have to deflate your own ego and be subservient to something, right? Like you need to choose something to worship. Um and to use a Wallacean turn of phrase. And it is not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. And
Yeah.
when you're a child going to a tennis academy or a high school or whatever, you're not capable of doing that. You're just
Mhm.
you don't understand how to be a person yet. You're still learning that.
Yeah.
And I think the cake box analogy is really smart. Especially in how the crocodile tells him like you don't need to understand chemically how the cake forms as a result of that,
Yeah.
but it will form if you just handle it. And that's such a hard thing to
It
it's
is.
such a hard thing to reconcile.
It is. And it's not it goes beyond even just, the AA or the NA or any of that. Like that's just a life thing. I think everybody is at some point getting in their own way too much and then getting frustrated because they can't get the thing that they're going for. And it really just comes down to just follow the fucking directions on the box.
Yep. There is also a reminder in this section of the fact that the guy Gately killed by taping up his mouth happens to be a Canadian separatist who was not only the handler for the Antitois, but was a major ally of the AFR. That's going to become important in like 5 pages. But also, again, just like how some of this stuff with his case in particular has gotten kind of pushed away, right? Like there's a articulation on 463 that the actual like murder 2 investigation basically got closed up by something called the Non-Specific Services Bureau. That is obviously the USDOUS, the U.S. Department of Unspecified Services. So even within this like really intelligent this section of like personal freedom and responsibility and I guess personal fascism is going to become a word we use now.
Yep, it's good. I love it.
Even within that, he is still building these connections and he's still building his world out in a way that is just like so perfectly crafted that it blows my mind every time.
Yeah.
So we learn more about his day there's a brief aside basically to Marathe and Steeply again, where they talk about the entertainment specifically and how this relates to the philosophy of what we've already been talking about. We'll get to that. But we learn sort of more about what Gately does. In particular, he's responsible for cooking in their house. And this is some of the funniest shit. This description of what he does when he cooks. Gately is an unlikely choice for an in-house chef, having fed for most of the last 12 years on sub-shop subs and corporate snack foods consumed amid some sort of motion. He is 188 centimeters and 112 kilograms and had never once eaten broccoli or a pear until last year. Chef-wise, he offers up an exceptionless routine of boiled hot dogs, dense, damp meatloaf with little pieces of American cheese, and half a box of cornflakes on top for texture. Cream of chicken soup over spirochete-shaped noodles, ominously dark, leathery, shake-and-bake chicken legs, queasily underdone hamburgers, and hamburger sauce spaghetti, whose pasta he boils for almost an hour.
And that's one of the better footnotes I've read.
It's my second
book.
favorite footnote.
It's so fucking funny. It's
my favorite footnote is the one where you flip to the back and it just says no idea. That's that's my favorite footnote. Because it's such a self-aware joke about how absurd the whole endnote thing is.
Yeah.
But then this one coming after the Betty Crocker thing of which, he never has thought to look at the side of the box to see if there's instructions is such a funny follow-up on what is a really, like, heavy emotional truth of these
And
pages.
that comes around again one more time in the section that we read. Not with a footnote, but he has a great it's a comedy rules of 3 and it's a timing that are pitch perfect. And I'll get to them when we get to them, but that reminded me of that.
None but the most street-hardened Ennet residents would ever hazard an open crack about the food, which appears nightly at the long dinner table still in the broad steaming pans it was cooked in, with Gately's big face hovering luggardly above it, flushed and beaded under the floppy chef's hat and Barrett had given him as a dark joke he hadn't got. His eyes full of anxiety and hopes for everyone's full enjoyment, basically looking like a nervous bride serving her first conjugal dish. Except this bride's hands are the same size as the house's dinner plates and have jailhouse tats on them. And this bride seems to need no oven mitts as he sets down massive pans on the towels that need to be laid down to keep the plastic tabletop from searing. Any sort of culinary comments are always extremely oblique. Randy Lenz up at the northeast corner likes to raise his can of tonic and say, "That Don's food is the kind of food that helps you really appreciate whatever you're drinking along with it." Jeffrey Day talks about what a refreshing change it is to leave a dinner table not feeling bloated. Wade McDade, a young hardcore flask alky from Ashland, Kentucky, and Dunny Glynn, who's still woozy and infirm from some horrendous workers' comp scam gone awry last year, and is constantly sickly and who's probably going to get discharged soon for losing his menial job at Brighton Fence and Wire and not even pretending to look for another one. The two have this bit they do on spaghetti night where McDade comes into the living room right before chow and goes, "Some of that extra fine spaghetti tonight, Dunster." And Dunny Glynn goes, "Ooh, will it all be lovely and soft?" And McDade goes, "Leave your teeth at home, boy," in the voice of a Kentucky sheriff, leading Glynn to the table by the hand, as if Glynn were a damaged child. They take care to do the bit while Gately's still in the kitchen tossing salad and worrying about course presentation. Though Tiny Ewell never fails to thank Gately for the meal, and April Courtelieu is lavish in her praises, and Bert F. Smith always rolls his eyes with pleasure and makes yummy noises whenever he can get a fork to his mouth. I love that segment because, like, not only is it very funny, but it is also, he is trying so hard. Like, Don actually really cares to the point where, like, someone gives him a hat that is meant as, like, a, basically like bullying more than anything else, and instead of that he wears it. He's trying. He just wants to make food for people. It is such a pure evocation of the kind of character that he has, like, as an individual, in a way that is really, really lovely.
Yeah.
He does not cook vegetarian, but he is asked to cook vegetarian. For Joelle Van Dyne and another sort of newcomer. And so he gets sent out in this car that he loves so much. And I'm so sorry to break this to everybody. The Aventura is not a real car. So if anyone wants to go try and find one themselves, it doesn't exist. But we get like a really solid description of sort of what he does when he zips out of the house. And then maybe one of the greatest transitions in point of view that is in anything I've ever read happens. I remember the first time I read this book, I was astonished by it. I remain astonished by it every single time that I read it. We're on 480. It says here, whose streetlights don't work for the same municipal reasons the street is in such crummy repair. And one piece of the debris Gately's raised and set spinning behind him. A thick, flattened MF cup caught by a sudden gust as it falls, twirling. It's caught at some anodyne's angle and blown spinning all the way to the storefront of one Antitois Entertainment on the street's east side, and hits its wax bottom, making a clunk. Hits the glass pane in a locked front shop door with a sound for all the world like the rap of a knuckle. So that in a minute, a burly, bearded, thoroughly Canadian figure in one of those Canadianly inevitable checkered flannel shirts appears out of the dim light in the shop's back room and wipes its mouth on first one sleeve, then another, and opens up the front door with a loud hinge squeak and looks around a bit, viz. And then Don isn't in the rest of the scene.
Yep.
It is really the only thing that it is similar to in anything I've read is JR by William Gaddis. Gaddis does transitions like that with characters, but of course that book is like all dialogue, so it's a lot harder to figure out how he's doing it.
What it reminded me of is not a book, but Robert Altman's Shortcuts. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But it's very much set up like that. That kind of like leaving one scene and literally the camera is just staying where it was and moving into the next with a different character, different scenario. Yeah, that's what it reminded me of.
Yeah, it's just such. I'm just annoyed that I'm not this good of a writer. Is how I constantly feel when I'm reading David Foster Wallace.
With you.
And of course, what follows is where we learn exactly how deadly the AFR are, is I guess the way that I would describe what this scene is.
This is what I was talking about earlier with the emotionally heavy but still like funny and at the same time kind of thing. Cause like the ultimate end of this, like what ends up happening to these characters is rough to read. Like it's very violent. But at the same time, it's like the squeaking and the the conversations and the fact that this guy does not speak French at all and people are speaking French directly at him and he has no idea what they're saying just makes it all the better. It's amazing. I love this part.
Yeah, and I remember the first time I read it, like it is very effective in showcasing to the reader why people are scared of this like terrorist cell.
Oh yeah.
Despite the fact that like you should have no reason to be afraid of assassins that go around in wheelchairs. And like the last time we've kind of seen them in action, so to speak, is when Orin noticed the guy stuck in the gravel. So like especially up to this point in the book, you have no reason to assume that they are anything approaching lethal. But then you actually get to see them in operation. You're like, oh shit, no, these people are very, very, to use Coy Harlingen's phrase, dangerous operators. But again, yeah, you're right. There is this humor to it where like I can almost see how it would be shot in like a Key and Peele skit of like,
oh yeah, absolutely,
every single time the lights kind of flicker. They don't flicker in the scene in the book, but in the skit the lights flicker and then like another wheelchair appears in like a half circle around the character or something.
Squeaky wheel, and then
him
like trying to run to the door, but his pants fall off.
Yeah, he pulls the gun out of his pants and he tears. Which
is a great setup because that's such a like it's made to look like the whole thing of like, oh, he keeps the gun in his pants and it's actively loaded. There's no safety on it. And he's going to just shoot himself in the dick. But that's not what happens at all.
Nope.
Much better.
And there's some detail that we get on the Antitois brothers. It's also just like a very good example of how Wallace is able to, almost in a Pinchonian kind of way, build characters very, very quickly.
Yes.
And then have them, disappear from the book entirely, or in this case, just get murdered. Where we learn that one of the brothers has clearly some kind of intellectual disability where he's quiet and he just likes to sweep. The other brother is kind of the brains behind their operation, so to speak. They run this video entertainment store. They've done some work for the Canadian separatist movement through the diplomat that was killed by Gately. But ultimately, like, nothing too serious, but he's holding onto this gun as like a revenant of that time of his life, basically. And there is some interesting stuff in here. On 481, it says Bertrand had actually been credulous enough with a wrinkled, long-haired person of advanced years in a paisley Nehru jacket, also of great age, and a puzzling cap with a skeleton playing in a violin emblazoned on it on the front, wearing also the most stupid appearing small round wire spectacles with salmon-colored lenses, and also continually forming the letter V with fingers of his hand and directing the letter V at Bertrand and Lucien. This is the guy that they get the entertainment cartridge from at some point in the past. Do you think that's himself?
I was wondering that too, and I don't know. I feel like it very well could be. That is very behavior-wise, that's very spot on
Yeah.
for him.
But especially, like, the mask of an old person, he has
Yes.
done that to talk to his kid. The film was never distributed anywhere, so if he was giving it up, then it would make sense that that's where they got it from. Like, there's enough reasons in my head that that could be him. It also appears as though this same person who gave them the cartridge also gave them DMZ in tablet form as opposed to, like, blotter sheet form. So again, some other intertextual stuff with things we've already read, and then that's all before the AFR actually show up, and they are looking for the entertainment. Is what they're looking for. They're looking for Infinite Jest, the film cartridge, and the brothers don't know what it is. They don't even really know why the AFR is there, but there's an immediate sense of terror as soon as they realize what's happening. And it's really effective, like, thriller, horror, suspense writing for just like 2 pages.
Yeah. And to real quickly go back to your point about Wallace being able to, like Pynchon does, build a character very quickly and effectively. What I was mentioning earlier about Lucien not speaking French because he doesn't know it, but we understand that he was taught French by someone who had ulterior motives because he taught him to say "Va chère putain," and it told him that it meant, "Look, mom, I can speak French and thus finally express my love and devotion to you." When really what it means is "Go fuck yourself, for fuck's sake."
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, that little details like that are crucial to how he does this, and I love that because that kind of thing comes into play majorly in a little bit.
And then it's also key that there is a one particular cartridge that they get. The displaced cartridges he had immediately viewed for though they were unlabeled, save for a commercial slogan in tiny raised letters of "Il ne faut plus qu'on pursuive le bonheur," which to Lucien and Antitois signified zilch. That means we must no longer pursue happiness when you translate it from French to English. And it says each was stamped also with a circle and an arc that resembled a disembodied smile. Um, that is an image that means death in this book, if you have not already picked up on it as you've read it. The cartridge that Infinite Jest is on is described as having this smiley face on it, as it's listed right there. Orin, when he's sending out the cartridges to people in the mail, puts a smiley face on the package. The AFR leader who's about to talk to him in French is wearing a smiley face mask. And the sort of being that hovers above the AA meeting in Gately's dream that represents like expulsion from AA and thus probably death is also wearing this smiley face mask. So if we're talking about like repeated motifs and imagery that is important, understand that every single time the, I'm going to say, Walmart smiley face shows up somewhere, or the comedian smiley face from Watchmen,
Yeah, there you go.
it is signifying death of some kind. I also think it's interesting that in French, the title of the Infinite Jest cartridge is far more revealing of the premise of the book than the name Infinite Jest is.
Yeah.
This idea of like we must no longer pursue pleasure, even though that cartridge is pleasure personified, and was essentially created by himself as a to talk to his kid. I don't. Sorry, that's a spoiler if you haven't read this book before, but like that is the exact opposite of what it is that he was trying to do with it, and he failed. He created the opposite of what he was setting out to create. So just again, like really, really effective stuff that you will notice on a second read, or if you're listening to this podcast while reading it for the first time, but something to continue to watch out for. And then I have everything highlighted from 484, starting with Lucien can see the variegated glints of passing low chassis headlights, all the way through to 486. And then it breaks very, very littly on 487, before I highlight through on 488 to the end of the chapter. Like the writing in this segment
phenomenal.
is so good.
It really is.
From all of this stuff that we already mentioned about like the effective kind of genre conventions that he's playing with there to the smart concept of the fact that like the character can't speak French, so the French is written in French with no translation, which unless you're someone who can speak French, like I can read it, but I couldn't the first time I read the book, and so
I had my phone next to me with Google
yeah,
Translate.
yeah,
Typing it in.
and so like it's such a smart decision because it puts you in the same mind of the character, but then also one of the best death scenes in anything that
Yes.
I've read from a standpoint of not exactly the description of like how he dies. That's gruesome and horrible, but like the book goes far enough to describe the process of him becoming a wraith and then like flying back home in
Yeah.
like very, very beautiful imagery where like the first time I read this book, I remember I just like stopped after reading that. And I just wanted to like sit with that kind of feeling for a while. Um, it's just some of the best writing in a book already filled with really amazing writing up to this point.
I have a lot of that same section marked off as well. One thing I did want to bring up real quick is there's brief mention of the terrible blizzards of Quebec of AD 1993. Having read as much Pynchon as I have, like I'm always when I see things like that, I'm like, ooh, I want to learn about that. So that was a huge storm that affected. I actually remembered it now, like actually going back and looking at it, like it impacted Texas when I was a kid there, and the amount, like to put it in perspective, if it's referring to this as a terrible blizzard of Quebec in that particular storm that moved up from the Gulf of Mexico into Canada, they got about 16 inches of snow. For comparison, Mount LeConte in Tennessee got 56 inches. So it was a huge storm, and Quebec got the kind of smaller part of it, but still got a lot of it.
Yeah, crap ton of snow.
Yeah.
Also, if you're looking for evidence of how this book might be narrated by the ghost of James Orin and Cadenza, the fact that we have access to what happens when you become a ghost after you're murdered is a good indicator of why that would be the case. And I guess I just want to read off that last line where he becomes a ghost because it's just
it's great.
It's just so good. Bursting then through the wool and puncturing tile and floor at a police lock's canted angle to hold him upright on his knees, completely skewered. And as the attentions of the AFRs in the little room are turned from him to the shelves and trunks of the Antitois' sad insurgent lives, and Lucien finally dies, rather a while after he's quit shuddering like a clubbed muskie, and seems to them to die. As he finally sheds his bodysuit, Lucien finds his gut and throat again, and newly whole, clean and unimpeded, and as is free, catapulted home over fans and the convexity's glass palisades at desperate speeds, soaring north, sounding a bell clear and nearly maternal alarmed call to arms in all the world's well-known tongues. Fucking brilliant.
Yep.
Nothing else that I can say.
Yeah, it's just perfect. It's perfect writing.
So before we go into moving a mattress, we have two final sections with Marathe and Steeply. And there's something to talk about in it, but less so than the other ones. It is essentially talking about like what the entertainment is, right? Like these conversations are the comparison between the entertainment and how it is lethally entertaining to these different experiments that have been run throughout history of what happens when you give someone access to just like pleasure, like on demand forever, right? And it's a subtle thing Wallce is doing of like, this is what this does. Like if you're wondering why there was a guy strapped into a chair for like, what was it, like 18 hours or something like that until he died and a bunch of other people died, like this is it. Like this is why it's so dangerous. And it mostly looks through the lens of this experiment they did with rats where they hooked them up to something called a P terminal, where they could press a button and just it would stimulate basically the pleasure sensors of their brain. And then when they wanted to do trials on human subjects, they were discussing the ethical implications of that when it got leaked, and then suddenly there was a line of people around the door, which is just fucking terrifying. Like, just like thinking about that when they're discussing this thing that happened, just the implications of a line of people wrapped around the door.
Yeah.
Which in and of itself is not dissimilar to a really earlier portion of the book where you're being given the description of Enfield Marine and its complexes of the line of people around the door for methadone. So again, like similar sort of recalling imagery from earlier in the book throughout this whole section as it bridges some stuff. Do you have anything on that? I mean, the really interesting stuff is in when Steeply asks him if he'd watch it.
That made me think about whether I would watch it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it genuinely did. And this goes back to that sort of that conversation that they had earlier. The sort of like that idealized self-satisfaction and doing what you want to do and the freedom to do it and all that kind of stuff. Like if such a thing ever existed, it's a really fun kind of philosophical game to play, I guess, with your own brain of like,
yeah,
would you watch it? Like, because you can't, it's pretty much implicitly clear that you can't just watch part of it, right? If you start watching it, you're watching it, and then that's the last thing you're doing.
That you're right. That is the last thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
That's a great way to put it.
It's weird because you wouldn't know that going into it, right? Like you wouldn't know necessarily that that's what it is. So if you don't have the knowledge of before, your natural inclination might just be to watch it. But if you do have that knowledge, like that's when it really becomes a conundrum, right? Like I know what this is capable of. Am I stronger than is my will stronger than this thing? And then it really becomes a matter of like just going back and forth as to whether or not you can do it. And I found myself in reading that section like almost more distracted by my own thinking of what I would do,
right?
Than Steeply or Marathe.
Well, and I think that that's the point, right? I think that like because obviously there is a reveal happening in here of the fact that both the Department of Unspecified Services and the AFR already have copies of it. Like that is revealed here, as it was earlier in the book as well. And of course, there is a footnote within the Antitois section that reveals that the issue is the master copy, and the Antitois don't understand that you can't play a master copy that's editable on a regular player. So like there's all of that going on in the background. But I do think that you're correct in that like the point of this segment is to also ask the reader, would you watch it? And I think I've mentioned this a couple times. I don't think necessarily on this series we're doing, but in other David Foster Wallace related episodes, because my enthusiasm for this man infects everything. Where I talked about like reading this book, and if you read it closely and with the intention that Wallace wanted you to, it sort of forces you to like reckon with some things about yourself, or at the very least do some self-investigation. And this is an example of how he does that, of like not turning to the reader and being like, well, would you watch it? But in having a conversation that is completely plausible between these two characters that also then asks a question of the audience. And he does that a lot through this book in very, very subtle ways. This is just the easiest one to talk about rhetorically. But it is one of these moments that like if you are reading this book closely and you're internalizing the arguments that are being made and how Wallace is making them, it's kind of hard not to examine some things about yourself, because there's no way to ask the question of like, would I watch the entertainment without, if the answer is yes or no, even being, okay, why? And what does that mean about where I'm at in my life at this time that I'm considering that, right? So would you watch it? Do you have a definitive answer?
As much as I could like convince myself I wouldn't, I think I would. I genuinely think I would. Like even knowing what it's capable of, I think that my general just desire to know all of these kind of unknowable things, like I've always had it in my head that and I've never really been a very religious person. I was as a kid, but I'm not anymore. But I've always thought, like, if there is some kind of an afterlife and I got to choose like the ultimate thing that I get to do, I'd literally just want to like learn all the unknown mysteries of the world. That's been like my biggest thing. And so I think something like this is almost too big to pass up. Even knowing that it would be the literally death of me. I think my curiosity and my sort of weird impulse to know would just take over.
Yeah. The thing that's like, especially on a read through, so fucked is that you already know that later on when the AFR's testing it, that there is a guy that they let watch it and then like shut the TV off, and he like loses his mind. Like his brain is broken by the fact that he is not going to be exposed to that anymore. Where it's like even if you did sit down to watch it and like your wife was ready to like turn the TV off after 5 minutes or whatever, that is still going to like warp your brain in like a very serious way somehow. And I think that if there's any reason why I would expect someone like yourself or myself to watch the entertainment, it would be strictly from the perspective of like what is it like?
Yeah.
You know, what is the experience of that? It is not unlike drugs. Like obviously, that parallel is very clear within the content of the book.
Oh,
but like,
for sure.
you know, why does anyone take any heroin, LSD, cocaine? Like the only reason why you're going to take that is because you want to figure out what that's like, what it's like to experience that.
That's genuinely been one of the major things that has kept me from doing any hard drugs is knowing how much I don't want to say addictive personality I have, but like that general curiosity of what is it like. It always is like consuming me, and I even like I will have to like stop myself from looking up like what does it feel like to do heroin, because then I'm afraid I'm gonna like, well, that's a description, I don't know that that's a, you know what I mean, like it's such an overwhelming drive, and I really have to stop myself sometimes from getting too far in. Like it's why I smoked cigarettes when I was 13 and couldn't quit until I was in my 30s.
Ugh,
Like
I miss smoking cigarettes.
It was a hard thing to quit, and it was one of those, it started because I was just curious what it felt like.
I started for a much lamer reason, is because it looked cool.
It does. It does. Like I can't deny it. You can't watch fucking The Maltese Falcon or Out of the Past and tell me that they don't look cool.
Yeah.
You can't look cool with a vape. That looks stupid.
You look like you're sucking on a USB drive.
Yeah. You put a guy in a fedora and a trench coat and let him smoke a cigarette, talk to me about how he's going to find some dames to help him solve the crime. I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm there for a good time.
I think that brings us to the mattress.
I think it does, yeah.
No, if we're again going to get into the stuff with maybe the wraith of JOI as narrating the novel, it would make sense that he would connect hearing the squeak to a hearing the squeak from his own life.
I was literally just putting that together as we were talking. And
yeah. And so this is, as a end note reveals to us, it is like basically a segment of an article that he wrote a really long time ago on how he started to kind of conceptualize annulation, right? This thing that we talked about in, I think, the first episode. That is how the Onan system of government powers its country, and it's also what generates all the waste. And it is one of my favorite parts of the book. This chunk. For a while, it was my favorite. That was what I told my partner before we started recording this. I think it is probably, as I said, now no longer the case. But it's one of these cases where just like, it is so mundane what is being described, right? Like it is moving a mattress out of a room to check for a squeaky bed frame. but the impact of that mundanity is so large that it's kind of insane. Like my partner, when she eventually got to this part of the book and like we talked about it because I was so excited for her when she got to it. I was like, man, you're at the mattress rotating scene, yes. Um, and she zeroed in on the tomato juice as like this symbol of childhood trauma and of the passing of the generational trauma from one person to the next. Where like his father comes in, makes this juice, tells him to come with him, and then just hands it to him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know what to do with it. He's like, just take it. Just take it. Like that is such a clever symbol for that generational trauma, how that gets handed down, even though you don't want it. It just gets forced on you.
Yep.
You don't really know what to do with it either. So he just puts it on the floor and he like makes a little indent in the shag carpet for the cup. And just how like, again, like if we go back to what the definition of annulation is, as we talked about at the beginning of this podcast series, the waste from one step is used for the power of the next step. Like when his father keels over, or when his father like dies, whatever happens there, he is instantly imbued with this sense of like, oh, the wreckage of my childhood, as symbolized through this scene, through the passing of my father into me, is what I am now going to use to create, this system of energy, right? Like it, in the way that the previous section deals with someone becoming a ghost and returning home, this also feels like an embodiment of that spirit passing from one father to his son, which then, of course, as we've talked about extensively through these episodes, passes on to his kids and so on and so forth. Like it is just such a clever subtextual scene that I look forward to reading it every single time. And especially just like the other details of it that are really humorous, that kind of keep you sticking through something mundane, where like his father's wearing a girdle and is covered in like orange spray tan because he needs to look good on TV.
And in his work uniform.
Yeah, and his wig falls off.
Sandwich deliverer.
The man from Glad.
Yeah.
Yeah, just all of these little details that he throws in there. It is just such a good scene that, again, like I'm mad that I'm not as good of a writer as Wallace.
Here's the thing about this section. This is when I mentioned earlier, and we've talked about several times since, the sort of dichotomy of the serious and the funny that take place in this. And it's really, I guess, even more apt that Allie touched on the generational trauma thing, because this is my generational trauma. This is the kind of shit that I grew up with. This kind of scenario happened to me a lot.
Oh, and yeah.
Reading it was uncomfortable, but I still found myself laughing a lot because it's funny. But at the same time, like the whole thing of like this emotionally distant father who's, blaming everything on the wife and unable to accept whatever, faults may be his own. And then, the wife and mother who's there just kind of taking it all and just kind of distant and not there. And this child that's stuck in the middle of all of this, who didn't ask to be here in the first place, but was forcefully brought in and is now being made to hold this empty glass of tomato juice and then help lift a mattress that is way too big for him to have any hand in whatsoever, to the point that it almost crushes him. And it just, like, so much of it was just like flashbacks to my youth.
Yeah.
It just, yeah. It's a phenomenal chapter, though. I love it. It's wonderful.
It's kind of just like you and I talked about with the son, you're gonna be a tennis player sequence. Like it's so much of this is, I think, representative of our collective fathers between the two of us.
Yeah.
Of just like, this is a kind of guy that existed. I don't know if they still exist like that anymore. But was like pretty common for quite a long time. like for me especially, like I never moved a mattress, but there is a very specific memory from my childhood that this evokes in like a very serious way, in which I was doing math homework, which was like my worst subject. It's always been I am if you talk to Allie at some point, like when we see each other next, she'll
Mhm.
tell you just how bad at math I am. It's kind of
Oh, me
insane.
too. Me too.
Um and so I'm sitting there like concentrated really hard on math homework that should not be as hard as it is. And this is elementary school, I think is when this was, or maybe my first year of middle school or second. And my dad just like walks into the room and goes, "I need your help with something." Very similar to this.
Yep.
And I walk out into the foyer and they've brought home a live Christmas tree.
Oh,
And
boy.
he is trying to get it into the like one of those very old school like 1950s like stump holders
Yep, yep,
where
yep,
you
I
you
can
have to like
see it.
insert it, yeah, into the
Yeah.
circle, and you have to like
Got the
screw in
bolts
the
and yep,
bolts. Yeah, exactly.
yep.
And this is not something that should have been a thing at all, but like or in terms of severity, but over the course of about 10 minutes, it turned into an absolute, like, screaming match of my dad yelling at me about how it is that I needed to, like, better slot it into a spot, or, of course, as he's putting the, like, tree stump into the, like, holder, the legs are falling out of the sides of it because 'cause they're just held in there by pressure from the tree. Like, it is truly the, like, same thing as this mattress thing, and I think about that moment from my life all the time. So the idea that, it would carry through with this character to, it didn't inspire me to invent a new kind of fusion technology, but,
Well, why not?
like, I'm not that good at math, but, like, it is truly so representative of how these cycles of familial trauma just happen. Um, and I think Allie is absolutely spot on with the tomato juice of just like, "Here, hold this," and you just you don't have anything to do with it. You don't want it, you don't know what to do with it, it's just a thing you have now.
But it's always there too, and, like, no matter what
Yeah.
you can set it on the floor and you know it's there, and it's going
Yeah.
to haunt you.
Yeah. We all have these little glasses of empty tomato juice that our fathers have drank. Yeah, it's so good, and we already
It
said
is.
it at the top of the episode, but just the inherent humor of him walking around his dad's maybe corpse and just going, "Excuse me," and then just him and
Because
his
that's what you
mom.
have to do with that kinda dad, like, you don't know. He could be
Yep,
listening.
yep, you have no clue what he's up to, and then him and his mom just kind of exchanging silent glances as he helps her move the vacuum, and then she just goes, "Thanks," and then, like, walks in there and just starts vacuuming around his body, like, it is so it is so spot on of a depiction, and I think there's one part that I really love, when Jim realizes that his bed squeaks as well.
Oh my god, yeah.
His dad's response to that always makes me laugh in a way that just is really uncomfortable. It's on 499. I said to my father, since we're discussing squeaking beds, my bed squeaks too. My father was trying to squat down to see whether he could locate any bolts on the frame, saying something to himself under his breath. He put his hands on the frame for balance and almost fell forward when the frame rolled under his weight. But I don't think I even really noticed it until you began to discuss it. I said, I looked at my mother. I don't think it bothers me. I said, actually, I think I kind of like it. I think I've gradually gotten so used to it that it's become almost comforting at this juncture. I said. My mother looked at me. I'm not complaining about it. I said. The discussion just made me think of it. Oh, we hear your bed. Don't you worry, my father said. He was still trying to squat, which drew his corset and the hem of his tunic up and allowed the top of his bottom's crack to appear above the waist of his white pants. He shifted slightly to point up at the master bedroom ceiling. You so much as turn over up there. We hear it down here. He took one steel side of the rectangle and shook the frame vigorously, sending up a cloud of dust. The bed frame seemed to weigh next to nothing under his hand. My mother made a mustache of her finger to hold back a sneeze. He shook the frame again. But it doesn't aggravate us. in the way this rodential son of a whore right here does. It's it is so true that like when the trauma is not yours, it's really funny to like find entertainment in, or it's really
Yeah,
easy to
for
laugh
sure,
at.
for sure.
And just like the way in which he writes about this stuff with that classic escalating fashion that we've already talked about in this episode is just it's so much fun. It's so much fun, even though you are essentially reading about a child becoming traumatized.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, there's a part of me that almost pictures him looking like Colonel Sanders, even though he's not even though he's not representing KFC whatsoever.
Yeah. It's well, and what's funny is that I think my one of my favorite parts of this section is the fact that he can't turn off the sort of corporate salesperson part of his brain, because when he's talking about it, it reads almost like an ad, but just like with a shitload of profanity in it on 492. And at night, this one spot here we've isolated and identified seems to spread and metastasize until the whole goddamn bed's replete with squeaks. He drank some more of his tomato juice. Areas that gibber and squeak, my father said, until we both feel as if we're being eaten by rats. He felt along the line of his jaw. Boiling hordes of gibbering, squeaking, ravenous, rapacious rats, he said, almost trembling with irritation. It's just so over the top and comical in that sort of like made for TV product kind of way of like, I'm so exasperated and just, things are falling. It and it just like it really adds to the sort of lunacy of that scene. But at the same time, like you said, when you've been there, it's not funny in that situation. It's always more pleasant to read it from the outside looking in.
Yeah, absolutely. I was not laughing when my father was yelling at me about the Christmas tree.
Yeah, no, believe me, I've had many of those situations and some of them recently.
Do we have anything else we want to talk about for the book, or do we want to go into listener emails?
No, I guess we might as well go into the emails. So we got an email from Justin, and I will preface this by saying that a couple of these emails were older, and I apologize that we didn't get to them when they were sent in. This one is relatively recent. This is from Justin. He says, "Hello, Mappers. I've recently hopped aboard your lovely podcast specifically for your Infinite Jest related episodes. I listened to your Wherein We Begin by Beginning episode today. I think that was episode like first one, before we even talked about chapter 1. And I heard one of you mention that there is no reader's companion to Infinite Jest. But in fact, this is not fully true. There are at least 3 guides/companions published in book form, and I thought you might enjoy knowing about them. I've read all 3, so I'm a first-hand source. First, David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, a Reader's Guide by Stephen J. Byrne. Fairly bare bones, a slim volume, most of which is taken up by 2 critical essays rather than by companion material. Overall, not an amazing resource, but maybe useful to readers, especially for the chronology of Infinite Jest in the appendix, which attempts to place all the events of the book in chronological order. Also includes a basic chronology of DFW's life. A Reader's Companion to Infinite Jest by Robert Bell and William Dowling attempts to be more thoroughgoing, but comes off as the work of some literary scholars who are insufficiently obsessive to get a lot right about this book. I found it frustrating that it contained a fair number of errors about plot events, or in other cases that it presents what are only possible interpretations of key events as being definitive. Possibly does more harm than good for the interested reader. Elegant Complexity, a study of David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest by Greg Carlile. This book is amazing. It contains tons of guides and contextual info, including a map of the ETA grounds as described in the book, as well as the author's interpretive map of the book's themes and plot structure. It takes the book episode by episode and is most useful in cross-referencing easily forgettable connections between widely separated episodes. Most importantly, for all the major plot questions, narrative ambiguities, in the book, it presents multiple possible interpretations and gives an evidence and counter-evidence for each. Absolutely stellar work by a sufficiently obsessive critic. Hope this is helpful. Highly recommend Elegant Complexity. Thanks for a great pod, Justin." Thank you so much for that, Justin. I looked into them. Elegant Complexity definitely does sound like the better of those 3. So I am keeping an eye out for a copy of that. I did put out something on Blue Sky a little while back referencing all 3 of them, I think, if not just Elegant Complexity. So I will also leave the titles of those and links to where you can get them in the show notes. So if you're interested, definitely check those out.
Yeah, thank you for writing in. I don't want to correct you. I think maybe what I had said was there's no good companion for Infinite Jest.
That
but
sounds about right, yeah.
I could totally be wrong that I just said there was none. Elegant Complexity is the one that I want to read. I was aware of that prior, and I just haven't gotten around to reading it because a lot of my other experiences with Wallace scholarship, I just wasn't particularly impressed by or didn't find much out of it. But that is definitely your recommendation has definitely moved that up for me. So I will definitely give it another look now that I know someone has read it and thought it was good. Our next email comes from Tobias, who says, "Mielo." That's how me and my wife greet each other on the phone. Tennis, everyone. My favorite movie title is the Peter Weiss adaptation, and listening to the Infinite Jest pod, the filmography endnote was one of my favorite episodes. I have organized a tennis tournament style elimination bracket for the movie titles on Hannah Smart's Discord server, and the results is attached. Hannah Smart has a footnote number 1, which corresponds to at the Howling Fantods on Twitter. Please get her onto the pod. She is incredibly knowledgeable on IJ. I would love to. If you want to log back into our Twitter account and send her a message, Cody. I am aware of her. I have not read much of her stuff, but I know of that account. And then Discord server maps to footnote number 2, which says, for a group read I couldn't participate in. I really appreciate your dedication to the form here in this email. Anyhow, I wanted to reach out about the Mario discussion. Mario strikes me as a holy fool type of character that is characterized by homelessness, inability to provide for themselves, some sort of physical disability and idiocy, very low intelligence. Their social position allows them to say the obviously dumb. They are perceived as unclouded and in many cultures are praised and cared for. The most prominent example I can think of is the leader of the cult in Midsommar. I'd like to point out that DFW has seriously read Dostoevsky and likely modeled The Three Sons after the Brothers Karamazov. Why is that important? In the last couple of Dostoevsky's major works, although I cannot comment on A Green Boy because I haven't read that, we have a holy fool type character. In The Idiot, the titular character, Prince Mishkin, is a holy fool. In The Demons / The Possessed, Liza is a holy fool. Footnote number 3. I have the pet theory that Natasya and Liza are the same character, and that Stavrogan is the unified Mishkin Stavrogan. But that is unimportant here. Thank you for your theory, though. In The Brothers Karamazov, minor spoilers to the exposition, the holy fool character dies in the introduction. She was raped by Fyodor Karamazov, the father, and died during childbirth, if I recall correctly. You do recall correctly. She was taken care of by the whole village and didn't like to wear shoes, even in extreme Russian winter. I'm mentioning that because the problem of an illegitimate child that is close / works for the father is also a theme in IJ. With the most important of these holy fool characters, Prince Lev Nikolaevich. Why does nobody ever mention that this is Tolstoy's first name plus patronymic? Mishkin, Dostoevsky tried to create a positively good character. We see him falling in love, trying to help a seriously mentally ill woman, giving away all his inherited money to people asking for it while knowing he will never get it back. He is very sincere that way and speaks what he thinks because he is perceived as an idiot. I see Mario as that archetype. Same as Big D, DFW tries to advise to live a better, more honest, more newly sincere life by being sort of dialectical about it. I think dismissing him as you don't want to be like him, he's easily taken advantage of, are wrong answers. Question is, would you be happy like that? Would you be happy with being taken advantage of? Because Prince Mishkin is, for the most part. What is dialectical is maybe that for the 3 truly holy fool characters, each of their stories ends horribly. One is raped and dies in childbirth. The other is murdered. The last gets sent back to a sort of mental asylum. It's a shame that you never mentioned the what do you get when you cross an insomniac, a dyslexic, and an unwilling agnostic joke. Anyhow, sorry for the rambling. Sorry if my thoughts are too sporadic, but genuinely curious what you think about the fool archetype regarding Mario. And sorry for my any incoherent thoughts. I am not used to expressing myself coherently in English and didn't want to use AI. To the library and step on it. Tobsi. P.S. The discussion of suicide and depression was heartwarming. It takes a lot of courage to open up like this on air. I was moved by it and thankful that both of you failed.
A sentence I never thought I would hear before.
What a nice inversion. Yeah, thank you.
Is, yeah.
That's pretty great. Thank you, Tobias. You're both very thoughtful, intelligent, and lovely. I, of course, don't know you privately, but you seem great. I love listening to your podcast. PPS. I need to reread IJ immediately. You have given me such a strong appetite for it. Maybe I'll catch up to next month's episode. I love how you approach the book and its writing and its characters. I've become a fanboy of you. PPPS. The Brockengenpenst, I forgot what it was called in the book, was popularized by Goethe in Faust. The narrative of what happens when you have sex with an underage girl. Avril coded. And please check the phonetic spelling before pronouncing a foreign word. I'm not going to say it again out loud because clearly we did it the wrong way the first time. It was not pronounced in any way that we pronounced it. No hard feelings. I appreciated how you talked about the manifold meaning it had. PPPPS. I've heard you tried to quit online media. Well, try to escape these posts. Haha. A great and wildly varied email, particularly with your postscripts. I have nothing to add to what you said about Mario as the holy fool. I think that makes entirely a lot of sense. I think that us discussing like, is he taken advantage of? Would you be happy like that kind of thing? I think a lot of that isn't too dissimilar from us talking about like watching the entertainment, right? Like, it is that kind of outside perspective of both of us know that it would be, as Cody put it, the last thing we would do. But there is still this kind of internal happiness that you get from watching it. I think that something is very similarly going on with Mario in the sense that from the outside, if you're not Mario, there is that question of like, well, I would be taken advantage of and there would be disadvantages, but he is perfectly at peace. Like the only character who is. And so I think that you're right, that there is a dignity in Mario as a character and in how he lives and how he relates to the rest of the world that no one else has. And it's because of that holy fool sort of character that he has. And I think that like there is some truth to the idea that he is so far removed from his own head that he is essentially the antithesis to all of the different motifs in this book of people stuck in their own head. And yeah, you probably would be happy if you were Mario. I mean, especially within the Clipperton saga that is recounted from the last episode and this episode, in terms of the page that we covered. He's the only one who gets along with Eric. He's the only one who's able to like really meet him where he's at and like treat him like a human being and not like someone who is engaging in this sort of exploitative conquest. That is, speaking to an inherent happiness and disposition he has towards the rest of humanity that like nobody else is going to be able to have. So I think you're absolutely right. I hadn't considered this book in communication with Dostoevsky necessarily, but it makes total sense. The Brothers Karamazov is one of my favorite novels. It's genius. It was a book that changed my life in a lot of ways. And it seems like Russian literature really well, which is really cool. I feel like that's something that is like really specialized that not many people talk about that much anymore. Like, I don't know. I guess I've always wanted to be really into Russian literature as just like a practice, and I just haven't really gotten around to it. There are certain books that I really love, but I admire anyone who really is able to talk extensively about stuff like that within the Russian canon of books. And thank you for all the nice comments about the podcast. It's great that you're a fanboy of us now.
Yeah. I need to read more Russian literature too. I have read. I know I read the Brothers Karamazov a long time ago, so I need to reread that. I read The Idiot in college, and then I read Mikhail Bulgakov's Master and Margarita a few years ago. That's a phenomenal book. That's one that I would love to talk about. Yeah.
I was thinking of reading that this year.
It's a really good book. Very Lynchian at times, like very surreal, very weird. But it's basically, it's a Russian retelling of Faust, essentially, at its core.
With a cat.
With a cat, yes, a talking cat. But yeah, no, it's a phenomenal book. If you end up reading it, let me know. I would if nothing else, we could just read it concurrently and just talk about it. But it's a phenomenal book, yeah.
Sounds good to me.
And yeah, as far as the getting off social media, really that's just like I run most of the social media stuff for us. Luke does the Instagram, but I do Blue Sky and Twitter and the occasional Reddit stuff. I pretty much have not checked our Twitter in a long time.
They sent us an email saying we have a number of notifications.
I saw that. And I'm on Blue Sky fairly regularly, and it's usually just book related stuff, like talking about stuff that I've just read. I would like to be more present on there as far as like all four of us talking about like what we're currently reading. But that's not really a priority. And then Reddit, yeah, I lurk around the Pinch On subreddit still, but I'm not as active as I once was. That's a lot of that's just me personally needing to stay away from all that for the most part. So, but we will always
at this point. Yeah, at this point, my interactions with social media comes from this podcast. That's it.
Yeah, I really don't do much outside of if I'm on Reddit, I'm usually on trying to see if there's some new Pinch On news or something or theory or something. And Blue Sky for that.
I have a Substack. I very, very occasionally browse Substack. It's technically social media, but like that. Yeah, that's it. I am. My primary addiction since kicking an actual substance has been YouTube. And that I just have blocked on like all of my electronic devices, because if it's not, then I will ruin my whole day.
It happens. All right. So we got one more email from Nick. It says, "Hi all. First off, I'd like to say I'm overjoyed that you're covering Infinite Jest. I read it during the beginning of my journey with Pinch On, and both authors quickly came to reside among my favorites. My first comment is about the connections between IJ and Pinch On. In the earlier section, there is the silhouettes in the desert of Marathe and Steeply that Wallace said in interviews is a direct reference to Gravity's Rainbow. I've also been thinking about how in IJ, it is constantly noted that they hear the sound of trash getting launched over the border. In Infinite Jest, there is a, quote, screaming coming across the sky, but it happens over and over as a means of waste disposal rather than the impending doom of a B-2 rocket. Also, much later there, when Hal watches one tough nun, it struck me as a reference to the sisters in Vineland. Related to the recent section you spoke about, it struck me that similar to how Wallace uses shtit to speak truth in the earlier section, he uses a grandfather in the garage to deliver truths as well. The grandfather's failing is that he does not realize that he needs to treat people with care, in particular his son, not just objects. On a less serious note, and it may not bear discussion, Jane Orin in Candenza shares initials with jerk-off instructions, a category of pornography that Wallace may have been aware of that bears a certain resemblance to later depictions we get of the entertainment. Wallace seems to have prefigured gooning as a modern internet-related woe. The book certainly has a lot of references to masturbation, ONA, Onism, Society of Self-Gratification, etc. Anyways, hope you're well. Can't wait to hear your episode of the next section of Infinite Jest. Best, Nick." This is one of those ones I mentioned earlier that was lost in the shuffle of things, and we just got to kind of late, so I apologize for that, Nick. But I definitely think there's a lot of through lines between Wallace and Pinch On. I hadn't considered the Gravity's Rainbow thing as far as the trash being launched. I mean, I can see it. I don't think it's as direct as you're putting it here. Not that you're wrong about it. I didn't catch that. And then the connection with One Tough Nun and Vineland, I could see that being kind of a nod. That's a very specific kind of thing to point out. So that definitely kind of clicks. Other than that, congratulations on being the first person to actually have me use the word gooning out loud. I've never used that word before. I have seen it. I am aware of what it means. I have never spoken that word prior to today. So there's that. I don't know. I really truly don't know as far as the initials of names in Candenza and that connection. It is an interesting thought. It definitely is. I don't have really any connection that I can make to that myself. But I think that there could definitely be something there. The self-gratification, obviously, that's something that we talked about today. And especially with Steeply and Marathe and Gately as well. So there is definitely that. But either way, I mean, this is the beauty of reading, is everyone kind of takes their own thing away from it. And so keep sending over the ideas if you have them, and we'd be happy to talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. I have no idea when jerk off instructions were invented.
I also didn't know that was a thing. So I learned that today. I'm too old.
I mean, when Wallace was writing the book, early '90s, like internet pornography, if it was around, was pretty nascent. So I have no idea like when that as a category came into existence. But whether it's intentional or not, it is quite ironic.
Yeah.
And even if his initials aren't purposely related to that category of pornography, you're absolutely already hitting the nail on the head of the book having a lot of references to masturbation and self-satisfaction or self-pleasure in a lot of ways. I mean, that's a huge part of what's going on in there. And if you read contemporary interviews, pornography getting better and better was something that Wallace was like concerned about. It's something that he talks about in the Lipsky interview. It's mentioned in the end of the tour film. Like, it's something that he was obviously aware could grow into the monster that I guess gooning represents now as the ultimate kind of apotheosis of internet porn. So whether it's intentional or whether it's incidental, you're still correct in your assertion about the book. We got some YouTube comments. Our first one here comes from @Draxtor. You guys are blowing my mind. Marathe is indeed the most dangerous of fascists, equals one who leads with that core truth or dilemma about our existence as human beings, mapping it out logically, and then pulling you into the totalitarian fold. Damn it. I just completed my 4th read and have to revise my Marathe fandom stance completely. Yep. I get it, buddy. I totally get it. He was a character I really liked, and then hearing Wallace talk about it the way that he did in that interview I referenced, it really reshaped my understanding of it.
Yeah. I mean, like I said earlier, it's been something that I can't not think about when I read those scenes with him and Steeply now. So it is radically changing how I view him as a character. And I guess in a way I'm lucky that I was advised of this on my second read through. Because I probably wouldn't have clocked it for a while if not mentioned. So
Yeah.
It's been instrumental in how I understand him as a character. Then the last comment we got was actually a comment on that comment from Vanshaj _Y1S. Always my favorite part of starting a new month. I appreciate that. It's one of my favorite parts of any month is being able to do this show. I love doing the pinch on episodes, and I look forward to getting back into those and getting back into Against the Day. But I also I look forward to when we get to record these and have these conversations. I just like having someone that I can talk to about these books that I love that I don't really have other people I can talk to about it. And I'm glad that we can provide that, by extension to people as well. And that was always kind of the intention in starting this up, was just to kind of make it like a book club and just, get to have some conversations with people about really good books.
Yeah, agreed completely. Could not have said it better myself. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. For next month, we are reading pages 503 to 601, ending at the line, Orin's smile wasn't as cool as he thought, as he told the seated figure that was a matter of opinion. If you like what we're doing and you want to support the show, please consider making a donation on Ko-Fi. Funds we receive will be used to upgrade our equipment and pay hosting fees, and overall help just make the show better. We are on Ko-Fi at Mapping the Zone. And you can get in touch with us like these listeners did in any number of different ways. You can email us at mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. You can get in touch with us on Blue Sky at Mapping the Zone. We are on Twitter at PinchOnPod. We are on Instagram at Mapping the Zone Podcast. And we do have a store if you want to still support the show and get something tangible in response, where we have hats and shirts. We don't have hats. I always say hats. There's no hats. You can't get a hat. Don't try to get a hat.
Yeah.
There's none there.
If I will say, I routinely wear my Mapping the Zone shirt when I'm out and about.
Hell yeah, dude.
I know I'm going to be in a bookstore. I was walking around South Philly a couple weeks ago and walked past someone who said, nice shirt. and I was wearing it, and I didn't clock it until they were like further down the road because I'm an idiot and I don't know when people are talking to me. And so, if for some reason you are listening to this, thank you for the compliment. I'm sorry that I have minimal social skills outside of my close personal circle.
So if you want to be like Cody and wear shirts for this podcast and ignore comments from the listening public, you can do that for a pretty nominal fee. And you can go there to mappingthezone.myspreadshirt.com to check out what is available. There is an Infinite Jest shirt up there. That was designed by Luke, who is on our Pinch-On program. And of course, a shout out to Brad per second on Instagram and Reddit for designing our show's cover art. And until next time, thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.